the fire within. Carlos's voice, sharp and insistent, pierced the heavy silence. Jamie, weary beyond measure, closed her eyes and let her body slump once more, pretending to faint. It wasn't just an act. Every inch of her body ached with fatigue. Carlos growled in frustration. "Wake up, girl. I don't have time for this." His voice was a harsh whisper against the jungle's stillness. Grabbing Jamie by the arm, he shook her roughly. Jamie's eyelids fluttered open. She was exhausted, disoriented. The flickering campfire cast long shadows across the dense forest. Carlos stood over her, his figure lit by firelight, his eyes filled with impatience. "I need answers," he snarled, crouching before her. "Who are those people chasing us? What do they want? Why are you worth all this trouble?" Jamie met his gaze but said nothing. Her lips pressed into a hard line. Carlos's patience snapped. With a swift motion, he struck her. Pain flared across Jamie's cheek as her head snapped to the side. She gasped, curling inward. Then Carlos froze. The sight of her recoiling awakened something far uglier in him. His breath quickened, and he reached for her wrist. But before he could touch her, crack! A jolt of pain exploded at the back of his head. Carlos staggered, dazed. Blood dripped from his scalp. He turned, but Solomon was already on him. The former soldier seized him from behind, locking an arm around his throat in a brutal chokehold. Carlos thrashed, elbows slamming into Solomon's ribs, but the grip held. Carlos slammed his head backward hard. Solomon reeled from the blow to his nose, his hold loosening just enough for Carlos to break free. Gasping, he stumbled toward his rifle, rolling across the dirt. "You call yourself a rebel?" Solomon spat, wiping blood from his face. "You're nothing but filth." Carlos didn't answer. He lunged for the weapon, scooping it up and firing. Gunfire ripped through the jungle. Solomon dove behind a tree. Bullets tore into the bark, sending wooden shards flying. Carlos, vision blurred, kept firing wildly. Jamie, frozen in fear, watched the chaos. But as she saw Solomon pinned down, something within her snapped. She rose, trembling, and grabbed a blood-stained branch nearby. Quiet as a shadow, she crept behind Carlos and struck. The branch connected with a sickening crack. Carlos howled, collapsing to his knees. His rifle dropped, but not before one last shot rang out. Solomon cried out. Pain seared through his leg, and he dropped to the ground, clutching his calf. "Solomon!" Jamie screamed, rushing to his side. "I'm fine," he grunted through clenched teeth. Tears streamed down Jamie's face. "You're not." She held him tightly. "Thank you. Thank you for coming." Solomon, breath ragged, managed a faint smile. "You did good, kid." Jamie had always been the victim. Not anymore. Solomon wasted no time. He gathered Carlos's weapons, rifle, sidearm, and knife, and hurled them out of reach. Then he bound the unconscious man with thick jungle vines, tightening every knot. Once satisfied, he crouched over Carlos and slapped him hard. Carlos groaned, blinking back into the waking world, only to see Solomon's cold eyes staring back. "The only reason you're alive," Solomon said quietly, "is because I need a guide. You're going to take me to the village under Esteban's control, the one you were born in. The path through shadows." The first rays of dawn crept across the Amazon canopy, painting the dense foliage in hues of gold and green. Moisture hung heavy in the air, thick with birdsong and the whispers of hidden creatures. Solomon limped through the underbrush, every step a reminder of the wound in his leg. Jamie stayed close, one arm supporting him, her youthful face marked by fatigue and quiet determination. Carlos trudged ahead, his wrists bound tightly with vines, shoulders slumped under the weight of his choices. He knew the way to Esteban's village, the warlord's stronghold and his former home. A shortcut through a treacherous swamp could cut their journey to a single day. Solomon had accepted the risk. "You certain this is the fastest way?" Solomon asked, his voice gravelly. Carlos gave a dark laugh. "Fastest, sure. Safest? Not even close. Swamps crawling with snakes, jaguars, and worse. Trigger-happy hunters who shoot before they talk." Jamie shuddered. Solomon only tightened his grip on the vines. Then let's hope they aim for you first. The trio moved on, deeper into the green heart of the jungle. The SEAL forward camp. At a remote Navy SEAL forward camp, David Lancaster stood across from Commander Jack Turner, his longtime friend and current mission commander. Jack greeted him with a bear hug, but David's eyes held no warmth. "I need the truth, Jack," David said. "Why am I here?" Jack sighed, pouring coffee for them both. "We found you bleeding out near a cartel checkpoint. Local scouts radioed it in. You were lucky." David didn't flinch. Was I lucky? Or was I bait? Jack's face darkened. "David, it's Jamie. She's more than a scientist now. She's a target." David leaned forward. "Target of who?" "The U.S. government," Jack said quietly. David sat back, cold realization washing over him. Jamie wasn't just caught in the crossfire. She was the prize. A dangerous race. In a hidden jungle safe house, Ryan addressed Beth and Sophia, his tone urgent. "David's alive. The SEALs got to him first." Beth gasped. Relief etched across her face. Sophia remained stone-faced. "That's not the end of it, is it?" "No," Ryan said. "Victoria knows too. She's heading to the SEAL camp." Beth paled. "We have to stop her." Using bribes, forged papers, and jungle paths, the trio had made it into the Amazon unnoticed. Now, time was their enemy. "We will," Ryan promised. "But we have to move fast." The swamp's peril. The shortcut lay ahead, a sprawling swamp, its waters choked with moss and decay. Carlos turned, smirking, still feeling brave. "Keep walking," Solomon said. Their boots sank into the muck as they pushed forward. The air reeked of rot. Jamie's eyes darted in every direction. A hiss shattered the stillness. From the trees above, a massive black anaconda dropped silently, its eyes fixed on Jamie. Carlos froze. "Oh, that's bad." The snake struck. Solomon fired, one clean shot. The anaconda's skull shattered, its body convulsing before slumping into the mire. Carlos whistled. "Damn. Remind me not to piss you off." "Move," Solomon barked. Jamie nodded, swallowing her fear. They pressed on. The swamp grew darker, the sounds of the jungle more ominous. Distant gunfire echoed like a warning. They weren't alone, and soon the shadows would come alive.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
The thick canopy of the Amazon loomed over them as Solomon, Jamie, and Carlos moved carefully through the undergrowth. The dense foliage provided cover, but also hid countless dangers, snakes slithering through the leaves, jaguars stalking unseen, and the ever-present hum of insects filling the air. Carlos, his hands still bound with forest vines, led the way under the watchful eye of Solomon, who limped forward with Jamie's support. His injured leg slowed them down, but his grip on his gun remained steady, barrel pointed at Carlos's back. They had been walking for hours, the air thick with humidity, when Carlos suddenly stopped. "There's an old hunting path up ahead," he muttered. "If we take it, we can avoid the deeper jungle, but it means passing close to one of Esteban's outposts." Solomon exchanged a glance with Jamie, who looked uneasy. "How many guards?" Solomon asked. Carlos shrugged. "Usually 2 or 3. But if we wait until dark, their attention will be low." Solomon nodded. "We don't have time to wait. We'll handle it if needed." Jamie swallowed hard, gripping the knife Solomon had given her. She had never been in a real fight before, but she knew she had no choice. Ambush in the wild. As they neared the outpost, the jungle opened up slightly, revealing a small wooden shack with a makeshift watchtower. A single guard leaned lazily against the post, smoking a cigarette, while another sat inside, his rifle resting against the table. Carlos took a deep breath. "We should—" Before he could finish, a twig snapped beneath Jamie's boot. The guard at the post immediately turned, eyes narrowing. "Quién Who's there?" Solomon reacted in an instant. He raised his silenced pistol and fired. The first guard collapsed without a sound, but the second, inside the shack, was already moving. A gunshot rang out. Jamie barely had time to react before Carlos lunged forward, shoving her to the ground. The bullet missed her by inches, striking a tree behind them. Solomon wasted no time, rushing the shack with his gun raised. The guard inside fired again, but Solomon ducked, closing the distance before slamming the rifle out of the man's hands. He followed up with a brutal punch to the jaw, knocking the man unconscious. Carlos groaned from the ground, his chest heaving. Jamie stared at him wide-eyed. You saved me." Carlos looked away. "I have a daughter," he muttered. "She's only 6. I couldn't let you die like that. I couldn't watch it happen." Solomon studied him carefully before kneeling and cutting the vines from his wrists. "If you're serious about helping, then prove it. Lead us to the village." Carlos nodded. "I will." The gathering storm. Meanwhile, deep in the jungle, Ryan sat crouched over a small radio, listening intently. His spy within Victoria's forces had confirmed her movements. She was closing in on the Navy SEALs camp. Sophia and Beth stood beside him. "We should go now," Sophia urged. "If she reaches the camp, it'll be too late." Ryan clenched his fists. "I wanted to handle this alone. But if we do this together, we do it my way." Beth placed a hand on her pistol. "We're ready." As they moved through the shadows, the jungle whispered of the battle yet to come. Force. Victoria sat in the dimly lit interior of her armored vehicle, her expression unreadable as she listened to the scrambled transmission from one of her spies embedded near the SEALs' forward camp. The information was clear. One of the SEALs' assault teams had rescued a lone male survivor from a brutal clash between warlord factions. And the most critical piece of intel, the man had been personally revived by Commander Jack. Her eyes narrowed. David. It had to be him. Without hesitation, she reached for her satellite phone and dialed her superior. When the call connected, she relayed the new intelligence and made her request for additional support. The answer came back firm: capture Jamie at all costs. But the order carried an unusual directive: handle it diplomatically first. Victoria frowned. This wasn't about just one girl anymore. The fact that her superiors wanted diplomacy meant the Navy wasn't entirely aligned with the other military branches or government forces. There was a power struggle brewing, and Jamie was at the center of it. Lowering the phone, Victoria's lips curled into a smirk. If diplomacy failed, she knew exactly how to apply force. The necessary risk. Ryan knelt over the rough jungle terrain, securing the last of the sea, 4 charges beneath a layer of leaves and loose dirt. The narrow path ahead was the perfect bottleneck. Victoria's convoy would have no choice but to pass through. His plan was simple but deadly: detonate the explosives remotely, crippling the lead and rear vehicles to trap them in a kill zone. With the convoy disabled, he could either pick off the remaining forces or create enough chaos to slow them down. But he wasn't taking any unnecessary risks. While he handled the ambush, Beth and Sophia would break off and rush to the Navy SEALs' forward camp. They needed to warn David before Victoria arrived. If the SEALs weren't aware of her true intentions, they might cooperate with her too easily. Time was everything. If they moved fast enough, they could turn this into a battle Victoria wouldn't walk away from. Ryan exhaled, double-checking his detonator. Now, all they had to do was wait. Hope. As the dense jungle parted before them, the weathered wooden gates of Carlos's village came into view, flanked by 2 armed guards in mismatched military gear. The red armband of Esteban's men was visible even in the dim torchlight. The sight made Solomon tighten his grip on his rifle, while Jamie instinctively moved closer to him. Carlos exhaled sharply and turned to face them. "I'll go alone," he said, voice steady but low. "Let me talk to them. If I walk in with 2 outsiders, they'll shoot before I get a word out." Solomon's cold eyes remained fixed on him. "Fine, but if you even think of betraying us, I can still shoot your head clean off from here." His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was deadly. Carlos nodded stiffly, then raised his hands in surrender and began walking toward the gate. Jamie's heart pounded as she saw the guards snap to attention, rifles aiming directly at Carlos's chest. Her fingers clenched tightly, and she silently prayed that everything would be fine. Carlos walked toward the village gate, hands raised, his steps steady despite the weight of the choice pressing on his soul. The guards eyed him suspiciously, their rifles ready, their fingers tense on the triggers. "Why the hell are you raising your hands? Carlos," the guard captain barked. "And where are the others?" "General Esteban left with you. Didn't you all go together?" Carlos quickly processed the situation. If Esteban hadn't returned, it meant he was either dead or occupied elsewhere. That meant he had a choice, a final chance to betray Solomon and Jamie in exchange for his own security. He could spin a lie, tell the guards that the two outsiders were spies, let them handle the killing. Or he could stick to the path he had chosen. A brief image flashed in his mind, his 6-year-old daughter's innocent face. He had once believed that strength was the only way to survive, that betraying others was just another step on the ladder of power. But he had seen Solomon fight, seen Jamie's resilience, and in that moment, he saw an opportunity. If Solomon was healed, if he could gather the right people, maybe, just maybe, they could overthrow Esteban. After all, strength ruled the jungle, and if Solomon was strong enough to defeat him, then perhaps the village could have a new future. Carlos chuckled as he neared the gate, shaking his head as if amused. "Relax, amigo," he said with an easy grin. "General Esteban got some fresh intel. Government convoy loaded with weapons and supplies heading for the Brazilian army. He took most of the boys to intercept it. Sent me back to the village with these two." He jerked a thumb toward Jamie and Solomon, still hidden in the foliage. "This guy here is the foreigner we were supposed to rescue, but he's messed up bad, took a hit, and couldn't join the general on his mission. So Esteban told me to bring him in, patch him up. You know how it is. Only someone strong and reliable could get an injured man and a girl through the jungle." The guard captain spat onto the dirt, unimpressed. "Huh, you always did love running your mouth, Carlos. But I can't deny Esteban trusts you." He signaled to his men. "Let them in." Carlos turned to wave at Solomon and Jamie, relief flickering in his eyes as the gate creaked open. Solomon, still wary, kept his hand close to his pistol, ready for betrayal. But Jamie, exhausted yet hopeful, exhaled deeply as they stepped forward into the village. Meanwhile, deep in the jungle, Ryan crouched behind thick undergrowth, eyes locked on Victoria's convoy as it rumbled down the jungle road. The armored vehicles carried elite operatives, a force that could tip the scales if they reached the SEALs' forward camp. He took a slow breath, his thumb hovering over the detonator. The C4 was placed perfectly along the narrowest stretch of road. There would be no escape. Click! The explosion ripped through the jungle, a deafening roar as fire and metal burst into the air. The first armored vehicle was flung sideways, crashing into the trees. Smoke billowed, screams echoed. The convoy halted, soldiers leaping out to assess the situation. Ryan wasted no time. With practiced precision, he took aim and fired. His first shot found a soldier's neck, the second buried in another's chest. Chaos erupted as the surviving troops dove for cover and returned fire. Bullets zipped past him, striking trees and sending bark flying. "Shit," Ryan muttered, realizing they were regrouping faster than he had hoped. He fired off another few rounds before slinging his rifle onto his back and sprinting deeper into the jungle. His off-road motorcycle was parked a short distance away, his escape plan. But as he ran, he heard shouting behind him. They were following. The hunt was on. Arrival. As Beth and Sophia arrived at the Navy SEALs forward camp, they were immediately met with raised rifles and stern faces. The guards at the gate, dressed in full combat gear, wasted no time in blocking their path. "Halt! Identify yourselves," one of them barked, his tone sharp and unwavering. Sophia stepped forward, breathing heavily from the urgency of their mission. "We need to speak to David. It's urgent," she insisted. The guards exchanged glances, their suspicion deepening. "No civilians allowed. Turn around." Before things could escalate, a woman in combat fatigues stepped out from a nearby tent, her presence commanding. Rebecca, a combat medic who had once served alongside David in his SEAL days, had noticed the commotion. As she approached, her sharp eyes landed on Sophia, and for a brief moment, she hesitated. A flashback hit her. She remembered a rare moment of rest during a brutal mission. David, exhausted but smiling, had once shown her a photo of himself with Sophia. Back then, he'd kept it tucked inside his vest, a reminder of something worth fighting for. Snapping back to the present, Rebecca raised a hand, stopping the guards before they turned more aggressive. With a slight smirk, she crossed her arms. Well, well, she mused. I recognize you. David used to carry a photo of you, didn't he? She then turned to Beth. Now, mind telling me what brings you both here in such a hurry? Even though the woman was smiling, Beth couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unsettling about her. However, there was no time to dwell on it. Taking a deep breath, Beth got straight to the point. Victoria's forces are on the move. They know about David. They'll be here soon, and we don't have much time. We need to meet him before it's too late. Rebecca's smirk faded. In an instant, her demeanor shifted from casual amusement to deadly seriousness. Come with me, she said, turning toward the camp. We need to move. Now. Home and hope. As Carlos led the injured Solomon and the exhausted Jamie through the winding paths of the village, he took it upon himself to explain the dynamics of the place. The village, a mix of old stone structures and makeshift huts, was home to survivors, mercenaries, and those who had nowhere else to go. Loyalty here was fluid, shifting with power and opportunity, but one rule remained absolute: strength dictated authority. The villagers follow General Esteban because they fear him, not because they respect him. Carlos muttered under his breath, his gaze shifting to a group of rough-looking men watching from a distance. Some are loyal, some just bide their time, waiting for a shift in power. If you can prove you're strong, they might listen to you. Jamie, still catching her breath, took in the wary glances from children peeking from doorways and women who hurried past, avoiding eye contact. This wasn't just a village. It was a fragile ecosystem of fear, alliances, and silent rebellion. Carlos continued leading them through narrow alleys, passing by a group of men gambling outside a rundown shack and a merchant counting supplies under armed watch. He kept talking, explaining who could be trusted and who would sell them out the moment it benefited them. Solomon, limping beside him, remained silent, absorbing every detail. Finally, as they turned the last corner, Carlos's house came into sight. A simple but sturdy wooden structure, standing near the edge of the village. Just as relief started to settle in, a small, high-pitched voice cut through the air. Papa! Carlos froze. A little girl, no older than 6, came running toward him, her dark curls bouncing, arms wide open. Her eyes, filled with pure joy, were the only warmth in this cold, merciless world. For a moment, the hardened warrior's expression softened, his posture relaxing as he knelt to embrace his daughter. In that instant, the mercenary, the survivor, the brute, all of it faded. Jamie watched, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She clutched her pendant tightly, praying that, despite all odds, this place could still hold hope. Carlos led Solomon and Jamie through the winding paths of the village, the sounds of crackling fires and murmured conversations filling the air. The scent of cooked meat and jungle flowers mixed together, creating a strange but homely atmosphere. As they approached Carlos's home, a small wooden house with a fenced yard, a child's voice rang out. Papa! A little girl, no older than 6, rushed toward Carlos, her bare feet kicking up dust. She had dark curls like her father and wide, curious eyes. Right behind her, a woman carrying a toddler stepped onto the porch, her expression a mix of relief and frustration. Where have you been? Carlos, his wife, scolded before her eyes fell on the injured Solomon and the exhausted Jamie. Immediately, concern replaced her irritation. Inside. Quickly, Carlos said, ushering them in. Carlos led Solomon and Jamie into his home, with a warm glow of lanterns cast a golden hue over the modest yet cozy dwelling. The scent of burning wood mixed with the faint aroma of stew simmering in the corner. As soon as they stepped in, Carlos' 6-year-old daughter, Isabella, rushed to him, her small arms wrapping around his leg. Papa! She squealed, her bright eyes filled with joy. Carlos scooped her up effortlessly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Mi amor, did you behave? The little girl nodded enthusiastically before her gaze landed on Solomon. Her tiny mouth parted in wonder. Is he the hero you told me about? Carlos chuckled and set her down. See, Isabella, this is Solomon Kane, the strongest mercenary. The child gasped, her eyes shimmering with excitement. Like in the stories, Solomon, despite his injuries, managed a small smirk. Not quite, Nina, but I try. As introductions were made, Carlos' wife, Maria, and his elderly but sharp-eyed father, Alejandro, approached. Maria held their 1-year-old son, gently swaying him in her arms. She greeted Jamie warmly, instantly noticing the exhaustion in her eyes. Come, sit down. You must be tired, Maria insisted, guiding Jamie toward a chair while Isabella clung to her side. The bond between women, even strangers, was immediate. Carlos' mother, Rosa, joined Maria in preparing dinner, while Carlos motioned for Solomon and Alejandro to follow him. We need to get your wounds treated first. He led them toward the home of the village's doctor, who was also his father-in-law. As they walked, Carlos spoke in hushed tones. The village is not as peaceful as it seems. Esteban rules with fear. The people, they obey, but they do not respect him. Alejandro remained silent, his aged but wise eyes flickering with thought. Solomon, still alert despite the pain in his body, listened carefully. You think they'll support a revolt? Solomon finally asked. Carlos exhaled. If the right leader emerges. They arrived at the doctor's home. The man was in his late 60s, his hair completely white, but his sharp eyes assessed Solomon with the precision of a seasoned healer. You look like you've been through hell, the doctor muttered. Solomon smirked. Something like that. As the doctor worked on cleaning and stitching his wounds, Carlos spoke with his father in a corner. I need your help, Papa. We can't keep living like this. If we stand together. Alejandro sighed. You speak of war. Do you know what you're asking? I know exactly what I'm asking, Carlos said firmly. And I know exactly who we need to lead it. His eyes flicked to Solomon. Meanwhile, back at Carlos' home, Jamie sat with Maria and Rosa, who continued to cook while talking to her. The baby boy rested in Jamie's lap, giggling as she made silly faces at him. Isabella watched closely before tugging at Jamie's sleeve. Miss Jamie, are you really a hero too? Jamie hesitated before smiling softly. I don't know about that, little one, but I fight for the people I love. Isabella seemed satisfied with that answer. Then you're a hero to me. At that moment, Carlos and Solomon returned. Carlos' expression was determined. We have much to discuss after dinner, but first we eat. The small family gathered, breaking bread together. Laughter and conversation filled the air, but in the back of Solomon's mind, he knew this night was only a brief moment of peace before the storm. The fight for the village had begun. Meanwhile, at the SEALs Forward camp, Beth and David's reunion was filled with raw emotion. Beth clung to him as if afraid to let go, her tears soaking into his shoulder. David, usually so composed, let his own emotions slip as he held her tightly. The sight brought smiles to those watching, Sophia, the SEALs, and even Commander Jack, who knew how much this moment meant. But one person's smile faded. Rebecca, standing just beyond the group, felt her breath hitch when David finally turned to introduce them. This is my wife, Beth, he said, his voice steady, and my sister, Sophia. Rebecca's chest tightened. Wife. Her hands curled into fists at her sides as she stared at Beth. David had never mentioned a wife when they served together. Back then, he had been cold, distant, married only to the mission. If he had been single during their time in the SEALs, then that meant. Beth came later. Beth was the woman David had chosen after leaving the SEALs. After her, the realization struck harder than she expected. So she's the one who stole him from me. Rebecca swallowed, keeping her expression blank, but a storm churned inside her. For years, she had convinced herself that David simply wasn't the type to love, that the bond they shared in the field had been the only one he was capable of. And yet, here stood Beth, proof that he had moved on, proof that he had found something he never gave her. Commander Jack's sharp gaze flicked toward her, as if sensing the shift in her demeanor. But Rebecca refused to meet his eyes. She didn't want pity. She didn't want understanding. Forcing her hands to relax, she took a slow breath, letting the mask of a smile settle back onto her face. But deep down, the thought remained, Beth took something that could have been mine. The dim glow of a lantern flickered against the wooden walls of Carlos's home, casting long shadows over the circle of people gathered inside. Solomon sat cross-legged, leaning against the wall, his injured body still recovering. Jamie sat close to him, silent but attentive, her fingers absently running over a loose thread on her sleeve. Across from them, Carlos's family, his wife Maria, his elderly but sharp-eyed father, his mother, and his 6-year-old daughter, listened intently. Only Carlos's infant son remained blissfully unaware of the gravity of the conversation, sleeping soundly in Maria's arms. Carlos took a deep breath, his usual boisterous nature momentarily subdued as he prepared to lay out his plan. He had always been a man of action, but tonight, words were just as important as the battles to come. His survival, his family's survival, and the fate of the village depended on what they decided here. "We all know what kind of man General Esteban is," Carlos began, his voice firm but hushed. "The day he returns will be the day I die. You all know this. He will see my actions as nothing but betrayal. And it won't stop with me. He'll come after you, after Maria, after my father, after all of us. He will make an example of my family to remind the others that no one can oppose him." Maria's hands tightened protectively around their sleeping son, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's why I won't wait for him to come back," Carlos continued, his eyes sweeping over everyone in the room. "We have to take control before he does. If we don't, we'll be forced to run, and running through the jungle with his men on our heels is suicide." His father exhaled through his nose, nodding slowly. "You're not wrong, boy. Esteban's rule is just as ruthless as the corrupt government he fights against. He doesn't care about us, only about his own power. That's why I'm asking for all of you to stand with me," Carlos said, his gaze settling on Solomon. And with him, all eyes turned to Solomon, who had remained silent, listening. His reputation had already spread through Carlos's family, and even his 6-year-old daughter looked at him with the wide-eyed admiration reserved for heroes from fairy tales. Carlos gestured toward him. "You all know what Solomon is capable of. We've all heard the stories, but I've seen it with my own eyes." The man took on trained special forces and walked away. "He's fought wars in places we can't even imagine. And if he stands with us, I believe we can do the impossible. We can take this village from Esteban before he returns and carve out a life for ourselves on our own terms." A heavy silence followed his words. The weight of what he was proposing was not lost on anyone in the room. Solomon finally spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. "It won't be easy. Even with the element of surprise, Esteban's men outnumber us. You'll need more than just courage and numbers. You'll need a strategy." Carlos grinned. "That's where you come in." His father, who had been silent until now, stroked his graying beard thoughtfully. "If we're going to do this, we need the support of the villagers. Some of them fear Esteban too much to act. Others believe he's the only reason we aren't under government control. We need to break that illusion." Carlos nodded. "That's why we'll start by securing the village's key locations. The armory, the communications outpost, and the food supplies. Without those, Esteban's men won't be able to resist us for long." Solomon added, "You'll also need to cut off any potential reinforcements. If Esteban has men stationed outside the village, we take them out before they can regroup." The conversation picked up pace with Carlos, Solomon, and his father refining the plan. They spoke in hushed but determined voices, mapping out their next steps. Maria, Jamie, and Carlos's mother listened, their faces growing increasingly worried. The excitement among the men was palpable, but it was clear that the women in the room saw the dangers just as clearly. As the discussion grew louder, a small, distressed whimper cut through the air. Everyone froze. Carlos's infant son had stirred awake, his tiny face scrunching up before letting out a sleepy cry. Maria shot Carlos a pointed look. "That's enough for tonight," she said firmly, rocking the baby gently. Carlos exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Right, we should get some rest. But first, we need to talk to the village doctor. He's an important part of this plan. Solomon pushed himself up with some difficulty, Jamie steadying him as he rose. Carlos's father-in-law, the village doctor, was not only the closest thing to real medical aid they had, but he also held influence in the village. If they were to succeed, they needed his support. With the weight of what was to come settling on their shoulders, Carlos led Solomon and his father toward the doctor's house. The night air was cool, but the fire of rebellion had been ignited. There was no turning back now. Meanwhile, deep in the jungle, Ryan was on the run. But what was chasing him wasn't human. It was a pack of robotic attack dogs outfitted with high-caliber assault rifles, their mechanical legs pounding against the muddy terrain as they pursued him relentlessly. Ryan maneuvered his dirt bike through the dense foliage, the roaring engine barely keeping him ahead. The terrain was worsening, thick roots and uneven ground making it difficult for the bike to gain speed. But the same obstacles also slowed down the robotic hounds, their artificial limbs struggling with the unstable surface. As Ryan pressed on, the distant sound of rushing water filled his ears. He wasn't running aimlessly. He had a plan. Up ahead, anchored to the riverbank, was a motorboat he had prepared in advance for exactly this kind of escape. As a mechanical beast closed in, their red sensors locking onto him, Ryan didn't hesitate. He leaped off the bike, sprinted towards the boat, and jumped in, yanking the engine cord. The boat roared to life, kicking up waves as it sped down the river. The robot dogs skidded to a halt at the edge of the water, their targeting systems trying to lock onto him. But Ryan was already out of their firing range. He exhaled in relief, gripping the throttle. His plan was working. Next stop, the SEALs forward camp. Ryan's arrival at the SEALs forward camp. The jungle was eerily quiet at night, with only the distant sounds of insects and the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures. Ryan, covered in mud and sweat, pushed forward, his body aching from exhaustion. He had escaped Victoria's robotic hunters, but the real challenge was yet to come, reaching the SEALs forward camp before his injuries and fatigue caught up to him. As the lights of the camp came into view, Ryan let out a breath of relief. He was finally safe, or so he thought. The moment he stepped into the camp's perimeter, gunfire erupted. Bullets whizzed past him, forcing him to dive behind a tree. Shit, they're shooting at me, Ryan muttered, adrenaline surging. He peered out cautiously and saw the soldiers positioned at the gate, rifles aimed at his position. I'm friendly, damn it, he shouted. But the guards didn't seem to believe him. To them, he was just another scout from Victoria's forces, perhaps an assassin, perhaps a distraction. The SEALs weren't taking any chances. Ryan had no choice but to return fire. He pulled out his sidearm and fired a few warning shots, aiming deliberately off target to make them hesitate. His mind raced. Did Victoria get here before me? Did she already take the camp? The standoff didn't last long. Armed Humvees rolled out of the gate, their mounted machine guns pointed directly at him. Floodlights blinded him as the speakers boomed. Drop your weapon and surrender. Ryan hesitated. He could run, but where? There was no cover, no chance of escape. Gritting his teeth, he let the pistol drop to the ground and raised his hands. Within seconds, soldiers rushed him, forcing him to the ground and blindfolding him. Rough hands dragged him forward, and despite his struggles, he was outnumbered and outmatched. Damn it, you idiots, I'm on your side, he growled. But no one listened. A familiar voice in the darkness. Ryan was led deeper into the camp, his blindfold still covering his eyes. He felt himself being forced onto a chair, hands tied behind his back. His mind raced through possibilities. Was this really the SEALs camp? Or had Victoria's forces captured it? Then, a soft touch on his face startled him. Small hands cupped his cheeks, trembling. He felt warm tears drop onto his skin. Ryan, you're hurt. A voice sobbed. His heart clenched. Sophia? For a moment, fear gripped him. Had they captured her too? Was Beth here as well? His breathing quickened, panic setting in. Don't cry, Sophia, he said, forcing strength into his voice. I'll definitely save you. That bitch Victoria can come at me if she has the balls. Laughter erupted around him. A deep chuckle followed. The blindfold was yanked off, and Ryan blinked rapidly as his eyes adjusted to the sudden brightness. Standing before him was Commander Jack, arms crossed, trying to hold back his amusement. Beside him, Beth and David stood close, their hands intertwined. And kneeling in front of him, still holding his face, was Sophia, her teary eyes filled with relief. Ryan stared in shock. He was safe. The camp was secure. Beth smiled at him. "Welcome back, dumbass." Ryan groaned, his head dropping forward. "You guys are a bunch of pricks." The camp burst into laughter. Back in the village, the plan for rebellion. While Ryan reunited with his allies, far away in the village, Carlos, Solomon, and Carlos's father sat in deep discussion, the dim lantern casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. Across from them, Carlos's father-in-law, the village doctor, listened in silence, his face unreadable. "A rebellion?" the old doctor finally said. "Carlos, do you have any idea what you're asking for?" Carlos leaned forward. "I know exactly what I'm asking for. If we don't fight, we'll die. General Esteban will never forgive us for what we've done. He'll return, and when he does, he'll burn this village to the ground." The doctor's jaw clenched. He knew Carlos was right, but rebellion meant war. War meant casualties. Solomon, sitting quietly until now, finally spoke. "We're not asking the village to take up arms mindlessly. We need strategy. With your influence, you can help rally the people. You've saved their lives for years. If you tell them it's time to fight, they'll listen." The doctor exhaled heavily. "Even if I agree, how do you plan to fight? We don't have the firepower to stand against Esteban's men." Carlos smirked. "That's where Solomon comes in." The doctor turned to the legendary mercenary. "And what exactly can one man do?" Solomon met his gaze, his expression unreadable. Then, leaning back, he said in a calm, deadly voice, "One man can kill an army. I've done it before." Silence fell over the room. Carlos's father clenched his fists, his warrior's spirit stirring. "And what do you need from me?" he asked. Carlos's smile widened. "Help us rally the people. Help us win." The old doctor closed his eyes for a long moment. Then, with a slow nod, he whispered, "Then let's begin." Outside, under the moonlight, the winds of rebellion had begun to rise. The Shadow Council's virtual meeting. Deep within the encrypted networks of the world's most powerful entities, a secret virtual meeting commenced. The participants were not ordinary leaders. These were the true powers that shaped global events from the shadows. Representatives of the most powerful nations, multinational corporations, tech giants, and the wealthiest individuals sat in complete anonymity, their screens showing only masked avatars. Among them were also figures from severely secret organizations, some so old they predated the very nations they now influenced. The discussion began with cold efficiency, reviewing recent developments, the escalating conflict in the Amazon, the rise of rebellion against General Esteban, and the growing concern over Victor and Victoria's unchecked military power. Several members spoke cautiously, debating the long-term consequences of these events, even though the names in the report was doing their best to survive and thought they were protagonists of the story, but to the real top, the actions of those pawns were an entertaining farce at best, as no matter what happens at the end of the whole Amazon circus for those of them who can sit in this meeting, there was no result that would lead to their loss. But before the discussion could go deeper, a shadowed figure, believed to be the representative of Russia, cut in sharply. His voice carried the weight of impatience and authority. "Enough with this nonsense. The Amazon conflict is nothing but a sideshow. It's time we focus on what truly matters, retaking Antarctica." The virtual chamber fell into a tense silence. Then, one by one, the masked figures nodded in agreement. The real war was about to begin. The secret virtual meeting of the world's most powerful nations, multinational corporations, tech giants, and shadowy organizations had finally reached its critical juncture. The topic now on the table was the retaking of Antarctica, a mission that would shape the future of humanity. Various virtual avatars, each representing a different force, proposed their strategies. Some called for an overwhelming naval assault, using Earth's combined blue water fleets, to bombard the elven stronghold and land elite ground troops. Others suggested a covert infiltration, using special forces to sabotage key elven infrastructure before launching a full-scale attack. Then, there was a particularly eccentric billionaire, known for his reckless ideas, who proposed the most extreme solution yet. "Why waste time and resources?" he said, his voice full of manic excitement. "Just level the whole damn continent with nuclear bombs. The elves won't have anywhere to run." Silence filled the virtual room for a moment. Then, several representatives scoffed, while others outright dismissed the idea. "Fool," muttered one avatar, believed to be from Russia. "Even if we were mad enough to do that, have you considered the consequences? The radiation fallout? The environmental catastrophe? Not to mention," added another, "we have no guarantee the elves won't simply escape through their magic portals before the nukes even hit." The discussion dragged on, with no consensus in sight. The debate was going in circles until a deep, authoritative voice cut through the noise. "Enough!" The virtual avatar, believed to represent the United States, silenced the room with a single word. Then, in a tone that brooked no argument, he continued, "Nuclear strikes are off the table. A full-scale naval invasion is an unnecessary drain on resources. Let's get one thing straight. The United States will not bear the cost of a war for the rest of the world. If we go in, we expect everyone else to contribute, not just sit back and supply reinforcements." There was a pause. The U.S. representative let his words sink in before dropping the real bombshell. "But we do have an alternative." At that moment, he uploaded a file to the virtual meeting. Screens flickered as all participants opened the document, revealing a detailed blueprint. "Gentlemen," the U.S. representative said, smug satisfaction evident in his voice, "allow me to introduce the future of warfare, advanced mecha units." The file contains schematics for towering 5-meter-tall combat mechs, each equipped with short flight capabilities, machine guns, missile pods, and state-of-the-art targeting systems. The mechs were designed to be the ultimate battlefield equalizers, fast, durable, and capable of handling both magical and conventional threats. A murmur spread through the meeting. Some representatives looked impressed, others skeptical. One billionaire, always eager to act like he knew everything, leaned forward and said, "So, you built some big robots. What's the power source? Electricity? Nuclear mini-reactors?" The U.S. representative smirked. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "Neither," he said. "They run on something better." The room went silent again. "Magic stones," the U.S. representative declared. The revelation sent a shockwave through the meeting. Magic stones, the very thing that powered the elves' technology, the key to their advanced civilization, had now been reverse-engineered for human use. "This invasion troubled us," the U.S. representative admitted. "But fate has given us the tools to fight back. From the dead elves we recovered, we managed to extract and refine magic stones to power these mechs. With these, we can take the fight to them on equal footing." Excited discussions erupted among the avatars. Some were stunned by the breakthrough, others skeptical. But just as the U.S. representative was basking in the moment, a cold voice interrupted. "This is not just an American achievement." The word came from another avatar, one representing China. "We, too, have developed our own mechs," the Chinese representative said. The U.S. representative's smirk faltered. A new file was uploaded, showing schematics for Chinese combat mechs. Unlike their American counterparts, the Chinese models prioritized electronic warfare, radar superiority, and precision-guided smart missiles. Then, another voice joined in. "Oomph. And you think we wouldn't do the same?" This time it was Russia. A third set of schematics appeared on the screens. The Russian mechs were the most heavily armed, boasting brutal firepower at the cost of reduced radar capabilities and electronic support. The U.S. representative's frown deepened. He had hoped to keep this technological advantage a secret for a little longer. But it seemed China and Russia had already caught up. "Fine," he admitted. "It looks like we've all been busy. Let's compare, shall we?" The room was filled with tension as the three reports were examined. Chinese mechs, best electronic systems and targeting, but lower firepower. Russian mechs, superior firepower and durability, but weaker sensors and radar. U.S. mechs, best all-around balance, with camouflage technology that allowed them to blend into the environment when stationary or moving slowly. As discussions heated up again, a fourth file suddenly appeared. The participants blinked in surprise. "Another mech," someone muttered. The Indian representative finally spoke up. "This," he said, "is our contribution." A new set of schematics appeared. The Indian combat mech had a balance between firepower and radar, positioning it between the U.S. and Chinese models. On the surface, it seemed average, lacking a defining advantage. But then, one crucial difference was noticed. The Indian mech had a built-in magic shield. Gasps spread through the meeting. The U.S. representative's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. Magic shields are too power-intensive. If we use them, it slows the mech down significantly." The Indian representative chuckled. "You could say," he said, "that we have access to a better grade of magic stones." There was a brief moment of pin-drop silence. The implications were staggering. India had a superior refinement process, or possibly an entirely different source of magic stones. If they could mass-produce their shielded mechs, they might be the most survivable units in battle, although their technology in making mechs was the most raw, but their magic stone technology, or the heart of the mech, was the most cutting-edge, thus not letting them fall behind the top three. For the first time, the U.S. representative did not have the final word. The virtual meeting of world giants ended with the world's most powerful figures staring at each other in silence. The race for the ultimate war machine had begun. The air in the dimly lit house was heavy with tension. Shadows flickered across the faces of the gathered villagers, men and women who had lived under the iron fist of General Esteban for years. Carlos, Solomon, Carlos's father, and his father-in-law, the village doctor, stood at the center of the room, facing the small crowd of family, close friends, and trusted villagers. Carlos's father-in-law, a man respected for his wisdom and experience, had spent the last hour trying to convince them of the necessity of rebellion. He used the same logic Carlos had once used to convince himself that there was no future under Esteban's rule, that their only chance at freedom was to strike before the general returned. But fear ran deep in the hearts of the people. Many in the room had suffered at the hands of Esteban's men. They bore scars, both seen and unseen. Yet, despite their suffering, none had dared to rise up against him before. And now, even with the promise of freedom dangling in front of them, hesitation clouded their eyes. "What if we fail?" an older man muttered. "If we fight and lose, it won't just be us. Our families will be butchered." "He has too much power," another added. "Even if we kill the ones he left behind, what happens when he returns? He'll burn this village to the ground." Carlos clenched his fists. This was what he had feared. He had expected hesitation, but not this level of submission. And then a thought crept into his mind, a dark, ruthless thought. What if we can't afford to let them leave? If even one person here betrayed their plan, the entire rebellion would be crushed before it even began. Carlos slowly turned his head, locking eyes with his father. He didn't need to speak. The old man's sharp gaze told him that he was thinking the same thing. No leaks, no risks. Carlos looked back at the crowd. The weight of his decision pressed against his chest. If they refused to join, do we silence them? The tension in the room was thick, a bomb waiting for a single spark. And then, a voice, soft but firm, cut through the silence. "If you all wait passively, thinking Esteban won't come for you, then you couldn't be more wrong." All eyes turned toward the speaker. Jamie. The young woman stood beside Solomon, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her face was pale, but her dark eyes burned with determination. She could feel Solomon's steady presence beside her, his silent support giving her courage. "Today it's us," Jamie continued, her voice stronger now. "Tomorrow it will be you. If we don't stand up and resist Esteban, we won't have a future." The villagers remained still, uncertainty lingering on their faces. "You've spent your entire lives in fear. Do you want your children to live the same way?" Jamie's voice rose with emotion. "Do you want them to grow up as nothing more than trembling slaves? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some lowered their heads, ashamed. Others looked at their children, realization dawning on them. But not everyone was convinced. "You stupid girl," a young man snarled, stepping forward. He was no older than 20, with a hardened face and wild eyes. "You think words will change anything? You're going to get us all killed." He raised his hand, his palm swinging toward Jamie's face. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. But it never came. When she opened her eyes, she saw Solomon standing in front of her, his fingers wrapped tightly around the young man's wrist. A second later, Carlos moved, his massive frame lunging forward like a bear. He grabbed the young man in a vice-like hold, squeezing hard enough to make him groan in pain. Jamie's heart pounded in her chest. For a moment, she thought she had failed. And then, a voice rang out from the crowd. "I'll fight." A boy, no older than 13, stepped forward, his fists clenched. His eyes burned with defiance. "I'll fight," he repeated, louder this time. "I won't be a coward." His words ignited something in the room. Another boy stepped forward, then a man, then a woman. One by one, more and more villagers stood, their fear giving way to something new, determination. Solomon watched in silence, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Carlos, still holding the struggling young man, leaned down and whispered in his ear, "What about you? You still Esteban's dog?" The young man hesitated, then spat, "I'm no dog, and I sure as hell ain't gonna let a bunch of cowards decide my fate." He looked around the room, then smirked. "Besides, you old men are too slow. If there's a rebellion, we'll need someone young to lead the charge." Carlos laughed, a deep, booming sound, and released him. "Then I guess we have ourselves a rebellion," he said. A hushed silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of the village doctor's voice. "If we do this," he said, his tone grave, "there's no turning back." Carlos stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the villagers. "Then we make sure we win." And with those words, the rebellion of the village began. "Us." The young man who had previously raised his hand against Jamie slowly approached her with lowered eyes and a guilty expression. He hesitated as he got closer, until Solomon's cold gaze forced him to stop. The young man raised his head, looking into Jamie's eyes. He hadn't noticed before, but now that he saw her up close, he was mesmerized by her beauty. Unlike the prettiest village girls or the charming widows who loved to tease young men, Jamie had a scholarly charm, a quiet elegance that made her stand out. For a moment, he forgot why he had even approached her. A short cough from Solomon snapped him back to reality, and his face turned red with embarrassment. Jamie, watching his struggle, couldn't help but laugh. The young man quickly composed himself and introduced himself, apologizing for his earlier outburst. Jamie, still amused, raised an eyebrow. "Why did you react like that before?" The young man looked conflicted, unsure if he should tell the truth. But then, as if trying to impress her, or perhaps because of something deeper, he blurted out, "It was an act." Jamie frowned. "An act?" The young man nodded. "Yeah, I wanted to see if you were serious about fighting Esteban, like us." Solomon, who had remained silent, suddenly intervened. His voice was cold and sharp. "Who is U.S.?" The young man's smirk faded, and just like that, a new mystery was born within the rebellion. The Antarctic wind howled over the vast ocean, its icy breath lashing against the hulls of the largest fleet ever assembled in human history. Near the waters of the naval blockade, the might of Earth's blue water navies had converged, an unprecedented show of force against an enemy that defied all logic. The ocean was dotted with over 300 ships of various classes, from massive aircraft carriers to destroyers, submarines, amphibious assault ships, and support vessels. Alongside them, merchant vessels and civilian cruise liners, including the Pacific Star, had been repurposed for the war effort, serving as floating supply hubs, command centers, and emergency medical stations. Aboard the Pacific Star, Captain Mark Reynolds leaned against the railing of his cruise liner, exhaling a slow breath as he took in the sight of the massive fleet around him. Just weeks ago, he had been running luxury voyages through the Southern Ocean. Now, his ship was part of the most significant military operation in human history. After returning the critically injured young scientist to the authorities in Ushuaia, Mark had assumed life would return to normal. But fate had other plans. A war against elves. Against aliens. Despite all the reports, footage, and intelligence briefings, the reality still felt surreal. The elves of Forestia, a race from another world, wielding magic, had come to conquer Earth, and humanity was now answering with overwhelming firepower. His ship, the Pacific Star, had been designated as a mobile supply and medical base, meant to stay far from the front line while assisting the fleet. At least, that had been the plan. BZZZT. The sudden beeping of the ship's priority comms channel made Mark frown. He turned to his communications officer. "Patch it through," he ordered. A grainy but recognizable image of Fleet Admiral Henry Lancaster, the overall commander of the naval blockade, appeared on the screen. "Captain Reynolds," Lancaster's voice was calm but firm. "I'm overriding your current mission. Your ship has been reassigned as a landing carrier." Mark's eyes widened. "Sir, with all due respect, my ship is a cruise liner. We don't have troop carriers or amphibious landing craft. How exactly are we supposed to?" "You just need to get close to the coast," Lancaster interrupted. "The landing troops will deploy on their own." Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. Deploy on their own? That made no sense. "And how exactly do you expect us to defend ourselves if the elves attack?" "My ship wasn't built for this, Admiral. The lifeboats on board will be easy prey for enemy forces if something goes wrong." There was silence for a moment. Then Lancaster spoke again. "We don't have time to argue, Captain Reynolds. We need a big ship. Yours is the best option right now. I trust you to make it work." The transmission cut off. Mark was left staring at the screen in disbelief. "The hell does that even mean?" he muttered. A voice beside him cleared its throat. Captain." It was his first officer, Damien Vasquez. His voice sounded oddly uncertain. "You might want to see this." Mark turned to follow Damien's gaze, and what he saw made his breath hitch. Soaring across the sky, moving in perfect synchronization, was a formation of massive humanoid machines, each one 5 meters tall, with sleek armor plating and powerful thrusters keeping them aloft. Their metallic bodies gleamed under the weak Antarctic sun, and mounted on their arms were machine guns, missile pods, and advanced energy-based weapons. What in God's name? These were the mechas, Earth's most advanced war machines, designed for combat against the elves. And they were the landing force. Mark suddenly understood Lancaster's cryptic words. "You just need to get close." The troops weren't walking onto the beaches in landing craft. They were flying onto the battlefield themselves. Aboard the USS George Washington. The command center of the USS George Washington, one of America's 5 deployed supercarriers, was buzzing with activity. On the massive digital screen, the incoming formation of mechas was being tracked in real time. Admiral Henry Lancaster, the man overseeing the entire naval operation, narrowed his eyes. His communications officer, a young lieutenant, turned to him. "Sir, all mecha units have successfully deployed from their transport ships and are now en route to their assigned carriers for final pre-deployment checks." The Admiral nodded. "Put them on the main screen." The display shifted, showing a live feed from multiple camera drones. Each nation had its own unique mecha designs, optimized for different combat roles. The American mechas were the most balanced, strong radar, respectable firepower, and an advanced stealth mode, allowing them to disappear from enemy tracking when moving at low speeds. The Russian mechas were heavily armored, sacrificing radar capabilities for sheer firepower, loaded with Gatling guns, rocket launchers, and even railguns. The Chinese mechas relied on cutting-edge electronics, radar, and smart targeting systems, making them highly effective for precision strikes, though they lacked the brute force of their counterparts. The Indian mechas, however, had something entirely different. Unlike the other 3 nations, India's mechas did not have a particular specialization. Their radar range was between the Russian and Chinese models, and their firepower was between the American and Chinese designs. On paper, They seemed average. But what set them apart was one single feature. Magic shields, a revolutionary energy barrier derived from advanced research into high-grade magic stones. The technology should have been impossible to miniaturize for mobile use. And yet, the Indian representative had simply stated, "We have a better grade of what you call magic stones." The room was silent as they watched the Indian mechas activate their shields, glowing with a faint ethereal energy, deflecting simulated gunfire in real-time training exercises. The U.S. representative clenched his jaw. They had access to higher-grade magic stones before us. Admiral Lancaster shook his head. "No, they figured something out that we didn't. And now, they've just changed the game." The U.S. mechas had been considered the most advanced. But now, the Indian mechas were on equal footing, maybe even superior, depending on how effective the magic shields truly were. As the mecha formations neared the fleet, a quiet tension filled the air. The first wave was about to be deployed. The battle to reclaim Antarctica was about to begin, and humanity's newest ace was about to face its first enemy. Carlos and Solomon followed the young man, who eagerly led them toward the supposed stronghold of the first rebels. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant crackle of torches from the village guard posts. The trio moved carefully, avoiding patrols as they snuck past the outskirts. Before they left, Carlos had ensured the safety of Jamie and the others. His father and father-in-law had taken charge, reassuring everyone that they would keep the gathering secret and secure. Jamie had looked concerned, but nodded in understanding when Carlos promised he'd return with reinforcements. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, Solomon remained quiet, his thoughts lingering on what the young man had said earlier, about their leader being a witch and able to use magic. Carlos dismissed it as the boy exaggerating, but for Solomon, the word magic brought back memories of Antarctica. The elves, the war, the things that shouldn't exist but did. Carlos, on the other hand, was more amused than worried. "So, kid," Carlos said, smirking as he stepped over a fallen branch, "what makes you think your leader is better than me? I was Esteban's best man before I turned against him. Can she fight like me?" The young man grinned in the darkness. "She doesn't need to fight. She's different." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" The young man hesitated for a moment before finally saying, "She's like a witch." Carlos chuckled. "Oh, come on. Magic isn't real." Solomon, who had been listening silently, frowned. "You sure about that?" Carlos stopped laughing. He knew exactly what Solomon meant. The elves in Antarctica had proven that magic did exist, and if his so-called leader was truly capable of using it. Carlos narrowed his eyes. "Is your leader even human?" The young man looked confused. "Of course she's human, but she's special. You'll see." Their journey continued, taking them through dense forest, rocky trails, and even an abandoned mine tunnel that had long been forgotten by the village. The path was difficult, but the young man navigated it with confidence, leading them closer to the heart of the rebellion. As they walked, Carlos began to notice signs of habitation, footprints in the dirt, remnants of old fires, and even makeshift traps set along the trails. These rebels had been hiding for a long time. Finally, after what felt like hours, they arrived. A large, fortified cavern lay before them, hidden behind a waterfall that cascaded from the mountain above. The entrance was guarded by a handful of armed men and women, their weapons crude but well-maintained. At the sight of the young man, the guards lowered their weapons but remained wary of Carlos and Solomon. One of the guards, an older man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "Who are they?" The young man stood tall. "They're here to meet her." A murmur ran through the guards, and after a tense moment, the scarred man nodded. "Follow me." Carlos and Solomon exchanged glances before stepping inside. The cavern was more than just a hideout. It was a full-fledged base. Makeshift homes had been built within the stone walls. Fires crackled in the center, and men, women, and even children moved about with purpose. These were not just fighters. These were families. And at the heart of it all, standing with an air of quiet authority, was her. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with long dark hair that shimmered strangely in the firelight. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, immediately locked onto Carlos and Solomon as they approached. Carlos had met many leaders in his life. He had served under Esteban, had fought alongside hardened warriors. But there was something about her presence that made even him hesitate. The young man who had led them knelt before her and spoke with deep respect. "My lady, I have brought them." She regarded Carlos and Solomon with an unreadable expression before finally speaking. "I know who you are," she said, her voice smooth yet firm. "And I know why you're here." Carlos smirked. "Then I guess we can skip introductions." The woman's lips curled slightly, as if amused. "You want to overthrow Esteban. You want to use the village defenses to hold off his forces. But you're missing one thing." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" She stepped forward, standing only inches away from him. "You need me." For the first time in a long while, Carlos found himself at a loss for words. Solomon, however, spoke up. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "You said you could use magic." The woman's eyes flickered toward him. "Yes," she said simply. Carlos inhaled sharply. "Prove it." A silence settled over the cavern as the woman raised her hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a flick of her wrist, the torches around them flared with blue fire. Shadows danced unnaturally along the stone walls, and a sudden chill filled the air. Carlos clenched his fists. He had hoped, prayed, that she was just a fraud, that this was all smoke and mirrors. But now, seeing it with his own eyes, the woman lowered her hand, the flames returning to their natural color. "I don't expect you to trust me yet," she said. "But if you want to win, if you want to survive, then you'll need my magic." Carlos exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The war against Esteban had just taken an unexpected turn. Meanwhile, Victoria's convoy under attack. A deafening explosion ripped through the convoy, sending a wave of fire and shrapnel into the night sky. The lead vehicle had been hit first. Its armored frame crumpled from the force of the blast. The target of the attack, however, was the prisoner transport, carrying none other than the surrendered General Esteban and his men. Victoria gritted her teeth as she scanned the chaos. The attack had damaged their communication systems, cutting them off from headquarters. She had suspected that diplomacy with the SEALs and the CIA might not work, and this confirmed her fears. Someone didn't want a peaceful resolution. If the SEALs had truly turned against them, their base might already be destroyed. The alternative? They had sided with the Navy, leaving Victoria and her forces stranded in enemy territory. Gritting her teeth, she activated the emergency protocols. "Deploy the robotic dog unit. Track down the attacker," she ordered coldly. Within moments, the mechanical hounds, sleek and deadly, sprang into motion. Their reinforced titanium bodies allowed them to move effortlessly over the wreckage as their sensor arrays locked onto the fleeing assailant. The convoy's headlights flickered in the smoke, casting eerie shadows as the machines vanished into the darkness in pursuit of their target, Ryan. Behind her, a gruff chuckle interrupted her thoughts. "You look troubled, beautiful lady." Victoria turned to see Esteban, arms still bound, but wearing an infuriating smirk. The man had the audacity to be amused even while being transported as a prisoner. She sighed. "Not in the mood for jokes, General." "Neither am I," Esteban mused. "But from the looks of things, you don't have a lot of options. I assume this isn't how you expected your night to go." Victoria crossed her arms. "No, but I can adapt." Esteban smirked. "Then adapt. You need men, supplies, and a safe location." He leaned slightly closer. "I still control a village. We go there, and you'll have everything you need." Victoria studied him carefully. Trusting Esteban was a risk. But right now, it might be the only choice she had. She exhaled sharply and nodded. "Fine. We go to your village." The Pacific Star was never meant to be a warship. It was a luxury cruise liner, a vessel built for comfort, not combat. But as Mark Reynolds stood on the bridge, watching the wave of descending mechs, he knew his ship had become something far greater. The sky above the Antarctic waters was filled with flying titans, massive 5-meter-tall humanoid machines, their sleek armor plating gleaming under the cold, dim sunlight. Their thrusters roared as they descended onto the reinforced landing platforms of the Pacific Star and the other massive ships designated for the operation. They weren't just war machines. They were Earth's answer to the elves. Mark swallowed hard as he observed the organized chaos on the flight deck. The 300 mechs from the four strongest nations were landing in groups of 5 or 6, their thrusters flaring as they settled onto the ship. Even with the weight of these mechanical giants, the Pacific Star's reinforced deck held firm. And yet, this was only one of the landing platforms. Other large civilian liners were hosting additional mech teams, all converging for the upcoming assault on the Elven stronghold. A sudden beep from the communication console snapped Mark out of his daze. "Admiral Lancaster on the line, sir," the comms officer reported. Mark nodded and turned toward the main screen. The face of Admiral Henry Lancaster appeared, his sharp blue eyes and weathered face displaying the calm authority of a man who had seen too many battles. "Mr. Reynolds," Lancaster greeted. "I assume you've had enough time to take in the situation?" Mark exhaled. "You mean the giant metal warriors landing on my ship?" "Yeah, I noticed." Lancaster smirked, but quickly turned serious. "Let me make this clear. Your job is simple, but crucial. The Pacific Star will move toward the coast, covered by the Navy fleet, while the mechs will secure the shore for the main landing forces. Your ship will be on standby as a fallback point, in case we need to retreat." Mark folded his arms. "And if things go south?" Lancaster's expression darkened. "Then the Navy will cover your retreat, and you get the hell out of there with as many mechs as possible." A tense silence followed. Then Lancaster gestured to the screen, bringing up holographic images of the 4 different mecha models. "Since you're working with them, you should understand what they bring to the fight." The mecha deployment plan. Lancaster switched the screen to a battle simulation, showing the shoreline of Antarctica's Elven stronghold. Colored markers appeared, representing the different mech divisions. "The American mechs will be deployed first," Lancaster explained. "Their stealth mode will allow them to land undetected and clear enemy positions using precision strikes." Mark watched as blue markers moved forward, engaging enemy fortifications. "The Russian mechs will follow immediately after," Lancaster continued. "Once the Americans clear a section, the Russians will lock it down. Their heavy armor and overwhelming firepower will form an impenetrable defense, allowing landing ships to unload safely." The simulation showed red markers reinforcing the cleared zones, holding back simulated Elven counterattacks. "The Chinese mechs will provide long-range support from landing ships and forward positions," Lancaster added. "Their high-precision targeting systems will ensure no enemy forces regroup." The yellow markers moved in calculated patterns, taking down high-priority targets. "And finally, the Indian mechs will play a dual role," Lancaster said. "Their magic shields will protect vulnerable landing areas and absorb incoming attacks that could cripple the operation." The green markers flickered, projecting defensive energy barriers over the battlefield. Mark exhaled, watching the simulation unfold. Lancaster's plan was meticulous, designed to neutralize the elves before they could react. The mecha captains. Lancaster switched the screen to display 4 different pilots, each representing their nation's mecha division. "I want you to meet the 4 mech captains leading this operation," Lancaster announced. The first was Captain Samuel Briggs, the American representative. A veteran pilot with short-cropped hair and a confident smirk, dressed in a high-tech flight suit. "Nice to meet you, Reynolds," Briggs said. "Hope you keep the ship steady. Would be a shame if I had to fly back all the way to States because you got cold feet." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." The second was Major Viktor Petrov, the Russian captain. A grim-faced man with a scar across his cheek, his voice deep and heavy with a Russian accent. "We do not run from battle," Petrov stated bluntly. "If retreat is necessary, don't worry, we will cover you running Americans." The third was Colonel Zhao Wei, the Chinese captain. A calm, analytical woman with a piercing gaze. "Our strategy is precision. No wasted movement, no wasted shots," she said. "Stay out of our line of fire, and we will ensure success, and then no running Americans would have to be covered." And finally, Commander Arjun Mehta, the Indian captain, a soft-spoken but sharp-eyed man, his expression unreadable. "Even if things go south, we will provide the necessary cover," Arjun said simply. "Just be ready when the time comes." Mark nodded, sensing the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. Lancaster took a deep breath. "Everything is in place. The landing begins in 2 hours. You have that long to prepare." Mark exhaled slowly. "Understood." The screen flickered off, leaving the bridge in silence. As the final mechs landed onto the Pacific Star, Mark found himself staring toward the distant Antarctic coastline. The elves were waiting, and soon, Earth's greatest war machines would descend upon them. Meanwhile, on USS George Washington, Admiral Henry Lancaster stood in the command center, surrounded by senior officers. The upcoming Antarctic operation was critical, but it wasn't the only battle unfolding. His gaze shifted to another tactical display, one showing a remote jungle region deep in the Amazon. A classified operation was underway. David and Jamie Lancaster, his son and granddaughter, were out there, caught in the middle of an entirely different conflict. Henry clenched his jaw. 2 wars, one against the elves of Antarctica, another against something even worse. He turned his attention back to the Antarctic map. For now, he had a focus. The mechs were ready. The landing force was ready. In just a few hours, the war for Antarctica would begin. Respro. The icy winds of Antarctica howled through the elven fortifications as Vice Leader Serafina of the Royal Knights stood atop a crystalline battlement, her long platinum blonde hair billowing behind her. Clad in midnight blue enchanted armor, she narrowed her piercing violet eyes at the distant ocean. Beside her, Commander Lysaria of the High Elf adjusted the grip on her ornate golden spear. Unlike Serafina's ethereal presence, Lysaria was a warrior through and through, her braided golden hair tucked neatly beneath a battle-worn helm, her amber gaze sharp and unyielding. The humans were coming, of that they were certain. What they did not yet know was the full extent of the enemy's weapons. The lunar priestesses had woven divine barriers, shielding the coastline with layers of illusion and frost magic. But would it be enough? The High Elves relied on elemental mastery and disciplined formations, while the Royal Knights excelled in elite dueling and close combat engagements. Yet tension crackled between them. With Princess Diana and Commander Mary missing, the elven forces lacked a single, unquestioned leader. Serafina and Lysaria had their own loyalties, their own hidden orders, whispers from the priesthood that even Queen Alara had not yet spoken of openly. And so, even as the ocean churned in the distance, their thoughts were not solely on the impending battle, but also on the mission entrusted to them, one that even the human spies had failed to uncover. The battle begins. The Pacific Star trembled as distant explosions shook the air. The naval bombardment had begun. From USS George Washington, Admiral Henry Lancaster analyzed the battle map. The fleet's Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers fired Tomahawk missiles at the elven fortifications, while carrier-based aircraft rained down precision-guided bombs. But the elven forces weren't defenseless. Bolts of light and lunar magic intercepted incoming missiles, detonating them before impact. Some jets were blasted from the sky, forced to eject before their crafts exploded. Enchanted trebuchets, reinforced by magic, launched glowing projectiles that crashed into the sea, creating massive waves that rocked smaller vessels. Yet, despite the elves' resistance, the combined modern firepower pressed forward. Henry studied the enemy's formation. The Royal Knights and High Elves were fighting separately. Their commanders were missing. "Interesting," Henry muttered. "Something's off." The Royal Knights were being led by their vice commander, a determined warrior who had pledged loyalty to Mary and the Queen. Meanwhile, the High Elves under Princess Diana were following their own High Elf commander, a powerful strategist. Both leaders fought fiercely, but unknown to humanity. They were merely holding the front while their true commanders, Mary and Princess Diana, were on a secret mission assigned by the elven priests. The Grey Eagle's move. Inside the Pacific Star's hangar, Captain Samuel Briggs, leader of the American Grey Eagles, smirked as he climbed into his sleek, stealth-focused mech. "All units, initiate stealth approach," Briggs ordered. "We clear the shore. Don't engage unless necessary." The Gray Eagles activated their cloaking systems, vanishing into the mist. Moving in near silence, they infiltrated enemy positions, targeting elven siege, weapons, and defensive outposts. The first objective was to disrupt the elven barriers and artillery, allowing the main force to land safely. Naval artillery and Russian firepower. Meanwhile, Major Viktor Petrov, captain of the Russian Blue Titans, gave his orders. "Prepare for deployment. We hold the shore once the Americans clear it." The Blue Titans were built like walking tanks, their reinforced armor capable of withstanding magic-based attacks. Caliber cruise missiles from Russian ships pounded enemy walls, and as soon as gaps were created, the Blue Titans were dropped from heavy transport aircraft, landing in shock-absorbing pods. With heavy Gatling guns and railguns, they opened fire, crushing elven defensive formations with sheer firepower. Red Archers and precision strikes. Colonel Zhao Wei, captain of the Chinese Red Archers, studied the battlefield through her targeting systems. Red Archers take sniper positions. Focus on spellcasters and commanders. The Red Archers were built for agility and smart targeting. Using drones and radar-guided missiles, they launched sniper shots and guided rockets, eliminating elven officers from long range. One by one, mages and officers collapsed, struck by precision attacks before they could react. Green Guardians activate magic shields. Commander Arjun Mehta, captain of the Indian Green Guardians, took a deep breath. "Deploy shields and advance. We hold the front." The Green Guardians activated their revolutionary magic shields, creating energy barriers that absorbed elven magic attacks. As fireballs, ice spears, and magic lances rained down, the Green Guardians' barriers absorbed the impacts, allowing them to steadily push forward. Unlike the other mechs, which had specific specializations, the Green Guardians were balanced, capable of defense, offense, and countermeasures against magic. A brutal exchange. The battlefield became a chaotic war zone. Jets from USS George Washington launched bombing runs, striking elven fortifications. Elven mages retaliated with light and lunar magic, shooting down aircraft. The Gray Eagles infiltrated enemy defenses, surgically removing siege weapons. The Blue Titans crushed enemy positions, overwhelming them with brute force. The Red Archers eliminated enemy spellcasters, throwing elven formations into disarray. The Green Guardians shielded the entire force, ensuring steady advancement. Despite their efforts, the Elves held strong. The Royal Knights Vice Commander and the High Elves Commander coordinated counterattacks, using wave tactics and mobile spell formations to slow human progress. Mark and Henry's worries. On the Pacific Star, Captain Mark Reynolds observed the battle with a tense expression. "This isn't going to be easy," he muttered. "They're adapting fast." After saying this, Mark gulped in nervousness. "Looks like things will go south for sure." On USS George Washington, Henry Lancaster folded his arms. The battle for Antarctica was far from over. If they didn't break through soon, the Elves would regain the upper hand. There was no room for failure. After concreting his thoughts, he commanded, "Tell the others to fall in. Let them show what united humans can do. From this moment, all nations' navies are allowed to freely engage the Elves. Order the Mech to secure the landing site. Send in the landing troops. Take back Antarctica." The battle rages on. The Antarctic sky burned with fire and magic. Explosions echoed across the icy plains as human warships and elven battalions clashed in full-scale combat. The naval bombardment had intensified, with the combined fleets of multiple nations hammering the elven fortifications. At the same time, the Mechs had begun their assault, paving the way for the ground troops to land. From high above, jets from USS George Washington screamed across the sky, dropping precision bombs while narrowly avoiding blinding streaks of golden light magic fired by the elven mage battalions. Below, the human navy pressed forward with an unrelenting barrage of missiles, torpedoes, and railgun fire. Submarines prowled the dark waters beneath, launching volleys at elven naval positions. But the elves were not so easily overwhelmed. Elven warships, sleek and enchanted, glided across the waves, their hulls reinforced with divine blessings. Lunar priestesses stood upon their decks, their hands raised as they channeled shields of shimmering moonlight to deflect incoming attacks. Then came the counterattack. Golden beams of searing light magic lanced across the battlefield, slicing through the sky like divine spears. One struck a U.S. destroyer, slicing through its deck in a fiery explosion. Another tore through a Chinese frigate, its hull splitting apart as sailors desperately abandoned ship. But the humans had come prepared. All ships spread formation, increased countermeasures. Admiral Henry Lancaster barked into his radio. Electronic warfare systems flared to life, scrambling elven targeting spells. Anti-magic defenses hummed on battleships, absorbing and deflecting incoming magical attacks. Slowly, the balance of power shifted. And then, the Mets landed. Gray Eagles, the shadow of death. Captain Samuel Briggs smirked as his American Gray Eagles Mets touched down on the icy shores, their stealth modules flickering before fully deactivating. All right, boys, time to clear the house. Armed with high-powered plasma rifles and cloaked in adaptive camouflage, the Gray Eagles were built for infiltration and precision strikes. Moving with eerie silence, they slipped past elven frontline defenses and eliminated key targets. One mech crouched low, its thermal blade humming as it sliced through an elven ballista, causing a chain reaction that blew apart an entire artillery outpost. Another fired a suppressed railgun shot, taking out a high elf commander mid-incantation. The elves quickly realized they were being hunted. Vice Leader Seraphina of the Royal Knights narrowed her violet eyes, sensing the unnatural movement in the fog. "They're here," she whispered, gripping her enchanted rapier. With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a shockwave of light magic, exposing a cloaked gray eagle mech. Immediately, elven archers fired glowing arrows infused with divine magic, forcing the mech to retreat. But the damage had already been done. Several elven war machines were already reduced to smoldering wrecks. Blue Titans, the unbreakable wall. On the opposite side of the battlefield, Major Viktor Petrov led the Russian Blue Titans in a frontal assault. The massive, heavily armored mechs crashed onto the shore, sending shockwaves through the ice as they activated their kinetic barriers. Their thick armor absorbed multiple magical attacks, while their rotary cannons roared to life, shredding through enemy formations. One Blue Titan stood firm as a royal knight charged it, blade glowing with divine fury. The elf leapt, aiming to sever the mech's head. But before she could land the strike, a shockwave pulse erupted from the mech's arms, sending her flying into a ruined tower. The Blue Titans were not agile, but they were indestructible. Their advance was slow, methodical, and unstoppable. Viktor Petrov grunted as he saw an incoming Lunar Priestess squad weaving a powerful conjuration spell. "Time to burn them," he muttered. A hatch on his mech's shoulder opened, launching thermobaric missiles. The resulting explosion vaporized the entire Priestess squad in a single blast. The Russians were holding the line. Red archers, death from afar. From a vantage point above the battlefield, Colonel Zhao Wei's red archers locked onto their targets. Unlike the brute force of the Blue Titans or the stealth tactics of the Gray Eagles, the red archers specialized in precision warfare. Their mechs were lighter, designed for long-range sniping and surgical strikes. Each mech carried high-powered particle rifles, equipped with auto-targeting AI to detect magical energy sources. The result? Elven mages dropped like flies. A Lunar Priestess was mid-chant when a red archer fired a particle round, piercing her skull before she could unleash her spell. A High Elf commander tried to rally his forces, only for his head to explode from a perfectly placed shot. Zhao Wei remained cold and analytical as she spoke into her radio. "Red archers, eliminate any remaining field officers." One by one, the elves' chain of command began to collapse. "Green Guardians, the indomitable vanguard. Commander Arjun Mehta's Green Guardians were the final piece of the puzzle. Designed to be the most balanced of all mechs, the Green Guardians combined shielding technology with devastating counterattacks. As fireballs, ice lances, and light magic barges rained down, the Green Guardians' energy barriers absorbed the impact, preventing any significant damage. Then, they retaliated. A Green Guardian unleashed an electromagnetic pulse, disabling an entire platoon of elven war golems. Another switched to heavy plasma fire, melting through enchanted armor. Arjun himself piloted the lead mech, directing his forces with surgical precision. Hold formation. Do not let them retake the beach. The Green Guardians advanced, pushing the elves back inch by inch. The landing begins. With the mechs securing the beach, the second wave of human forces stormed onto the shore. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry divisions flooded onto Antarctica, moving through the secured breach created by the mechs. The largest amphibious assault in modern history had begun. Elven forces struggled to regroup, their chain of command fractured and their defenses in disarray. Vice Leader Seraphina of the Royal Knights clenched her fist, her silver hair drenched in sweat. This is not how we were supposed to lose. Commander Lysaria of the High Elves gritted her teeth. We must hold out until Princess Diana and Commander Mary return. They had one last plan, but it depended on their missing commanders. Mark and Henry's decision. On the USS George Washington, Henry Lancaster watched the battle unfold. We're pushing them back, but something feels off, he murmured. Mark Reynolds, watching from the Pacific Star, nodded. They're not fighting to win anymore. They're fighting to delay us. Henry frowned. Then what the hell are they waiting for? Unknown to the humans, deep within the elven fortress, a hidden ritual was nearing completion. And when it was done, the real battle would begin. Losing battle. The icy winds howled through the battlefield as the Royal Knights and High Elves struggled to hold the coastline. Defensive formations were crumbling, and human forces were advancing relentlessly. Vice Leader Seraphina of the Royal Knights gritted her teeth, her enchanted blade barely deflecting a burst of armor-piercing gunfire from a gray eagle mech. She had never faced such warfare. Every strategic retreat led to another bombardment, every attempt at counterattacks met with human ingenuity. Beside her, Commander Lysaria of the High Elves was breathing heavily, her golden armor scorched from an explosion. The once unstoppable might of the Elven Empire had been pushed to the brink. The Lunar Priestess's divine barriers had failed to hold against the combined bombardment of missiles, airstrikes, and railgun fire. Vice Leader Seraphina, one of her knights, called out, barely parrying a strike from a red archer mech. The defensive line is collapsing. Seraphina's silver eyes darted across the battlefield. The humans were advancing too fast. She looked towards the sea. Dozens of heavy transport ships and amphibious landing crafts were approaching, loaded with tanks, armored vehicles, and even more troops. If they landed, Antarctica was lost. The victorious humans. On the bridge of the USS George Washington, Admiral Henry Lancaster watched the battle unfold with a confident smile. They're breaking, he said to his officers. The elves fought harder than expected, but it's over. Once our landing forces reach the shore, their defeat will be sealed. On the Pacific Star, Captain Mark Reynolds exhaled in relief. Reports from the battlefield were clear. The Royal Knights and High Elves were barely holding their ground. The coordinated assault from mechs, naval artillery, and air support had finally overwhelmed the once mighty elven forces. On the ground, the Blue Titans and Green Guardians were securing the last remnants of elven resistance. Major Viktor Petrov of the Blue Titans had his forces pressing forward, while Commander Arjun Mehta of the Green Guardians provided shielding for advancing infantry. Green Guardians, keep up the barrier projections. Arjun commanded. We're almost through. Suddenly, an urgent warning came through their comms. Radar is picking up an anomaly. The summoning. Seraphina and Lysaria, despite their dire situation, felt it before it happened. The air turned unnaturally cold. The ground trembled. A deafening roar split the sky. A massive magic circle appeared behind the elven forces, glowing with lunar energy. It was unlike any magic Seraphina had ever seen, divine, ancient, a gift from the saint of the lunar church. From the depths of the ice, something colossal emerged. A 100-meter-long ice worm burst forth, its chitinous body glistening like frozen steel, its jagged maw filled with rows of razor-sharp fangs, exhaling a breath of pure, freezing death. The battlefield fell silent. Even the humans stopped firing. Then, the ice worm roared and the world shattered. The tide turns. The humans panicked first. Soldiers on the front lines recoiled in horror. Even experienced mech pilots hesitated. "What the hell is that?" Mark Reynolds shouted aboard the Pacific Star. "Massive energy spike," came the urgent report from the USS George Washington. It's moving toward the landing zone." Henry Lancaster's confident smile vanished. "All units, engage that creature now." The iceworm lunged. In an instant, entire squads of human soldiers were crushed beneath its massive bulk. A single sweep of its spiked tail obliterated an advancing column of armored vehicles, sending burning wreckage flying into the air. Missiles, railgun shots, and airstrikes rained down upon it, but the creature's body was impervious, magic-enhanced, reinforced by divine energy. The weapons that had devastated the elves now seemed useless. On the ground, Viktor Petrov and Arjun Mehta were the first to react. "We cannot let it reach the landing forces," Arjun shouted. "Green Guardians, defensive formations." The Green Guardians deployed reinforced magic shields, forming a barrier line to protect the incoming troops. The iceworm crashed into the shields, causing the entire formation to tremble. Mechs were knocked backward, systems overloaded from the impact. "Shields are holding, but not for long," a Guardian pilot yelled. Viktor Petrov gritted his teeth. "Blue Titans, focus fire. Aim for its eyes." The Blue Titans unleashed everything they had: plasma rounds, railgun blasts, and explosive charges. But the iceworm's frost-armored hide absorbed most of the damage, barely showing any signs of injury. For a moment, it seemed nothing could harm the colossal creature. Then, crack! A precise shot shattered the ice, shielding its eye, exposing the vulnerable flesh beneath. "Eagle now." Colonel Zhao Wei, captain of the Red Archers, barked through comms, her rifle still glowing hot from the shot. "No need to yell, I'm already on it." From beneath the chaos, Captain Samuel Briggs of the Grey Eagles made his move. His mech had been advancing silently, staying low under the cover of the Blue Titan's suppressive fire. Now, with the target exposed, he surged forward. With a precise, devastating thrust, Briggs drove his blade deep into the iceworm's exposed eye. A piercing screech shook the battlefield. The creature convulsed violently, sending out waves of frost and thrashing debris. Briggs barely had time to react. He yanked back, abandoning his embedded blade, and fired his thrusters at full power, narrowly escaping before the iceworm's massive bulk collapsed where he had just been standing. The creature reared back, preparing for a full charge. If it got past the Green Guardians, it would flatten the entire landing force. Arjun's mech was on emergency power, barely maintaining the barrier. "Victor, we need to stop it." "Then we stop it together." Victor's Blue Titans repositioned, firing anchor spikes into the frozen ground, bracing for impact. The iceworm lunged. Boom! The collision sent a shock wave across the battlefield. The Blue Titans' reinforced armor barely held, while the Green Guardian shields cracked but did not shatter. They had stopped the charge, but only barely. The elves regained hope. On the elven side, a stunned silence filled the air. The Royal Knights and High Elves, who had been on the verge of collapse, now stood tall again. Seraphina looked at the iceworm with awe and disbelief. Lysaria, gripping her spear, whispered, "The saint has blessed us." A powerful wave of elven morale surged. The Royal Knights charged once more, cutting down stunned human soldiers who had frozen in terror at the iceworm's arrival. The High Elves rallied, reinforcing their lunar priestesses, who began casting new waves of powerful magic. For the first time in the battle, the humans were the ones retreating. Seraphina raised her blade, her voice ringing across the battlefield. "We fight with the blessing of the saint. We take back the shore." A roar of renewed elven fury followed. The Battle of Antarctica, which had seemed won by humanity, was now hanging in the balance once more. And the true terror of the ice worm had only just begun. The battlefield was in chaos. The ice worm's deafening screech echoed across the frozen wasteland, a monstrous sound that sent shivers through even the most hardened soldiers. Its massive form writhed in agony, bluish blood spraying from its blinded eye, staining the ice beneath it. But even wounded, the creature was far from defeated. Samuel Briggs' mech landed hard on the ice after his daring attack, thrusters stabilizing his descent. His blade remained buried in the ice worm's eye socket, a testament to the successful strike, but there was no time to celebrate. "Briggs, get the hell out of there!" Colonel Zhao Wei's voice barked over the comms. "I'm already moving." Briggs shot back, his mech skidding backward as the ice worm convulsed violently, shattering the ice around it. Arjun Mehta's Green Guardians struggled to keep their barrier intact. The force of the ice worm's thrashing sent shockwaves through the energy shields, causing the generators to spark under the strain. "Shields at critical levels," one of Arjun's pilots reported. "We can't hold much longer." Arjun gritted his teeth. "Then we'll reinforce." He slammed his controls forward, pouring every ounce of power into stabilizing the barriers. But even as he did, he knew they needed a new strategy. They couldn't just defend. They had to bring this thing down. A desperate counterattack. "Petrov," Arjun called through the comms. "We need a plan now." Viktor Petrov, still directing the Blue Titans, cursed under his breath. "Our firepower barely scratches it. That damn thing's magic armor is stronger than I expected." "Then we go for the exposed eye again," Zhao Wei interjected. "It's our only weak point." But even as she spoke, the ice worm began to adapt. A thick layer of frost magic was forming around its wound, rapidly regenerating the damaged area. If they didn't act fast, their only advantage would be lost. Briggs, still maneuvering his great eagle mech away, took in the situation. "If we want to kill this thing, we need to hit it with everything we've got before it recovers. We don't have enough firepower for that." Arjun countered. "Not alone," Zhao Wei said, her tone sharp. "But together, a plan was forming. Coordinated strike." "Listen up," Zhao Wei snapped. "We combine forces. Arjun, keep your barriers up. Don't let that thing advance. Petrov, concentrate all Blue Titan firepower on the same damn spot. Briggs, can your eagles deliver a finishing strike?" Briggs chuckled. "If you open the window, I'll smash it." "Good. Then we hit all at once." Arjun's mech dug into position, strengthening the barriers. His guardians lined up behind him, their energy fields glowing brighter. "Green Guardians, hold the line." Petrov's voice boomed across the comms. "Blue Titans, maximum firepower. Aim for the wound." The battlefield erupted with coordinated fire. Plasma rounds and railgun shots hammered into the ice worm's regenerating wound, breaking through the frost forming over its eye. The beast howled in pain, its thrashing becoming wilder. Briggs took the chance. With a powerful boost, his gray eagle mech shot forward, a massive spear-like blade forming in its hand, a plasma charge built for one devastating strike. "This is gonna hurt." With all thrusters at full power, Briggs drove his weapon deep into the iceworm's skull. A massive explosion of energy rippled through the beast's head. The iceworm let out one final, earth-shaking shriek before its massive body stiffened, its death throes sending tremors through the battlefield. Then, with a final, bone-crushing collapse, it slammed into the ice. The monster was dead. The aftermath. Silence followed. For a moment, neither side moved. The ice worm had been an unstoppable force, something beyond the scale of modern warfare. And now, it lay still, slain by the combined might of humanity. Then, the human forces erupted into cheers. The battle wasn't over yet, but this was a victory, a symbol that no matter what magic the elves threw at them, humanity would not break. But on the other side of the battlefield, the elves were not celebrating. Elven desperation. Seraphina's hands trembled as she clutched her sword. No, this is impossible. Lysaria, standing beside her, was equally stunned. The saint's blessing has failed. For the first time, fear spread through the elven ranks. The humans had slain a divine beast, something even the greatest of their warriors could never dream of. Seraphina's mind raced. If they didn't act now, the battle would be lost. She turned to the royal knights. We cannot falter. We are warriors of the saint. If the humans have defiled her blessing, then we will make them pay with their lives. With a furious cry, she raised her sword, rallying the remaining elven forces. The elves charged once more, this time driven not by confidence, but by desperation. The battle rages on. The humans had little time to react before the elves struck back. With renewed aggression, royal knights and high elves surged forward. Swords clashed against mech armor. Magic spells burst through the air, and the frozen battlefield was once again consumed by war. Zhao Wei's red archers repositioned, sniping from higher ground. Don't let them regroup, she ordered. Arjun's green guardians shifted from defense to counteroffensive, launching barrier-enhanced strikes to push the elves back. Petrov and the Blue Titans reinforced the front line, their mechs holding firm against the elven assault. And amidst the chaos, Samuel Briggs prepared for one last strike. This ends today, he muttered, charging forward once more. The chant of the saint. Just as it seemed that humanity had finally secured victory, with the elves being driven back in full retreat, a chilling voice resonated across the battlefield. A sacred chant, spoken in the divine tongue of the elves, filled the air with an ominous presence. The very sky darkened as a massive magic circle ignited above the fallen ice worm's corpse, glowing with a deep, unnatural blue. The battlefield froze, not just from the cold, but from a dreadful realization. The ground trembled violently as the lifeless body of the ice worm began to twist in agony. Its dead flesh convulsed, cracking apart, as something horrifying fought to emerge from within. A monstrous, otherworldly force was awakening, something beyond the ice worm itself. Silence fell across both human and elven forces. And then the ice worm screamed once more, but this time it was not its own voice. For a moment, the battlefield was silent. The ice worm, the monstrous guardian of the elves, lay still, its massive body sprawled across the frozen wasteland. The humans had fought tooth and nail to bring it down, and victory had seemed assured. Then the sacred chant echoed across the battlefield. A deep, otherworldly voice reverberated through the icy winds, speaking in a tongue unknown to humanity. The very air trembled with divine energy. Above the fallen ice worm, a colossal magic circle formed, its intricate runes glowing with chilling lunar power. The corpse of the ice worm began to convulse. Its frozen flesh cracked, jagged fissures forming along its segmented body. At first, the human forces assumed it was simply the final death throes of the creature. They were wrong. Something inside it was trying to break free. And then, the horror began. The young ones emerged. The ice worm's corpse ruptured. From its sundered body, dozens of creatures slithered out, smaller ice worms, ranging from 10 to 25 meters in length. Their bodies, though not as massive as their progenitor, were just as lethal. They drilled into the ice, their burrowing bodies sending tremors through the ground as they maneuvered unseen beneath the battlefield. The first attack came without warning. A young ice worm erupted from the frozen ground beneath a green guardian mech, piercing its cockpit with jagged mandibles before dragging the entire machine underground. The pilot's scream was cut short as the ice sealed shut. Panic set in. The human forces, already worn from battle, were now facing an unseen enemy from below. The ice worms attacked from beneath, bursting through the surface before disappearing back into the depths. Infantry were swallowed whole. Mechs were torn apart. Even the massive tanks, which had been pressing the advantage, were now vulnerable. Arjun Mehta, commander of the Green Guardians, quickly took charge. All units, adjust formations. Stay in motion. Don't remain stationary, he ordered. Use seismic scanners to track movement beneath us. The Green Guardians, specialists in defensive tactics, formed a protective perimeter around vulnerable forces, deploying energy barriers at key points. But even their advanced shields could not fully prevent the ambushes. Arjun saw one of his mechs collapse, its leg dragged under by a burrowing worm. He had no time to mourn. The largest of the young ice worms, a 25-meter behemoth, was heading straight for his position. Arjun's gamble. The massive young ice worm lunged, shattering through a mech formation as it made a direct charge for Arjun. He had no time to think. His only chance was to let it swallow him whole. Disengaging his shields, he stood his ground. His second-in-command screamed through the comms, "Commander, move!" But Arjun held firm. The ice worm's jaws engulfed his mech, swallowing it in one swift motion. For a brief moment, everything was dark and silent inside the creature's frozen gut. Then, boom! Arjun reactivated his energy shields, expanding them to full power. The sudden force ripped through the ice worm's insides, tearing its internal organs apart from the inside out. The creature convulsed violently before exploding in a spray of ice and viscera. As the massive ice worm collapsed, Arjun's mech emerged from the ruins, battered but intact. The battlefield erupted in cheers. His Green Guardians rallied, using their seismic scanners to track the smaller ice worms. Once identified, coordinated bombardments of plasma and railgun fire rained down, forcing the creatures to surface, where they were quickly dispatched. Humanity was fighting back. But on the elven side, something else was happening. The order to retreat. Princess Diana von Forestia, royal heir and twin sister of Diug, stood atop a ridge, watching the battlefield with narrowed silver eyes. The young ice worms were too wild, too uncontrolled. They attacked without discrimination, devastating human forces but also endangering the elves. By her side stood Mary, a common elf and leader of the Royal Knights, the very unit Diana had once scoffed at. Mary clenched her fists as she saw elven warriors, her warriors, being swallowed by the very creatures they had summoned. "This is madness," she said. "We have to retreat." Diana turned to her, her expression unreadable. As a royal elf, she was above Mary in every way, by blood, status, and magic. Yet, despite their difference in rank, Mary spoke without fear. Diana looked back at the battlefield. The ice worms were killing both humans and elves indiscriminately. If they remained any longer, they risked complete annihilation. Diana exhaled sharply. She hated this. She was an elven princess, blessed by the goddess Luna. Retreat was not in her nature. But she was also a commander, and no amount of pride was worth the lives of her people. She turned to Mary. "Give the order." Mary's eyes widened slightly. Diana, a royal elf, was allowing a common elf to lead the retreat, but there was no time to dwell on it. Mary immediately commanded the royal knights to fall back, their well-trained discipline ensuring a swift withdrawal. Diana followed, her presence alone keeping the high elves in check. As the elves retreated, the young ice worms did something unexpected. Instead of continuing their attacks, they burrowed deep into the ice. Then the ground shuddered violently. Antarctica fractures. The young ice worms, now deep beneath the ice, began drilling outward in all directions. Massive cracks formed along the battlefield, stretching for kilometers. The ice groaned and splintered. Then, with an ear-splitting crack, an entire section of Antarctica broke off from the main continent. The separated landmass, now an island, began drifting away. Before human forces could react, elven mages raised immense magical barriers, shielding the floating island in layers of defensive spells. Inside, the remaining ice worms and retreating elven forces vanished from sight, concealed behind an impenetrable veil of magic. The battle was over. Humanity had won, but a new elven stronghold, a fortress island, had just been born. Aftermath and laughter. As the dust settled, human forces regrouped. The survivors were exhausted but victorious. The Green Guardians and Blue Titans, who had borne the brunt of the battle, gathered together. Arjun Mehta, despite his triumph, had suffered some injuries. His mech had barely held together after being inside the ice worm. As he staggered out, his comrades greeted him with cheers and claps on the back. Captain Samuel Briggs of the Grey Eagles shook his head with a grin. That was either the bravest or the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Colonel Zhao Wei of the Red Archers folded her arms. I'm leaning towards dumb. Arjun chuckled, then winced as his ribs protested. Then Viktor Petrov, the massive leader of the Blue Titans, approached. Without warning, the Russian wrapped Arjun in a crushing bear hug. Arjun immediately grimaced. Victor ribs. The entire squad burst into laughter. Despite everything, despite the horrors they had faced, they were still alive. And for now, that was victory enough. The dimly lit cavern pulsed with an eerie blue glow, casting shifting shadows against the jagged stone walls. Solomon Kane kept a firm grip on his rifle, his instincts on high alert. Beside him, Carlos stood rigid, his eyes locked onto the mysterious woman before them, the so-called witch, the rumored leader of the rebellion. She was unlike anyone Solomon had ever encountered. Draped in deep crimson robes, her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her piercing violet eyes glowed faintly in the low light. Arcane symbols shimmered on her wrists as if etched into her very flesh, pulsating in rhythm with an unseen force. Carlos cleared his throat. You've already shown us your magic. Now tell us why you're really here. The witch tilted her head, studying them both before she finally spoke, her voice smooth yet laced with authority. My name is Isabella Nocturne, and I am here for the same reason you are, to end Esteban Cortez's rule over this land. The name sent a ripple of tension through the air. Solomon didn't flinch, but he caught the way Carlos's fingers twitched over the grip of his revolver. I don't trust magic, Solomon stated flatly. Isabella's lips curled into a knowing smirk. And yet you're standing here, listening to me. Carlos exhaled, rubbing his temples. Look, magic or not, we're running out of time. My people have been gathering fighters, but Esteban's men still control the village. We don't have the numbers or weapons to face them head-on. Isabella nodded. That's where I come in. She waved her hand, and from the shadows, a group of cloaked figures emerged. Rebels, fighters armed with blades, muskets, and improvised explosives. Their eyes gleamed with determination, but also with fear. I have been gathering those who wish to fight, Isabella continued. But raw numbers are not enough. We need strategy, timing, and most importantly, distraction. Solomon frowned. Distraction? Isabella stepped closer. A storm is coming, Captain Kane. Esteban is returning, and he's not coming alone. Carlos stiffened. What? Isabella raised her hand, and a swirling image formed in the air, a vision of Esteban Cortez, his face twisted in a cruel smirk, leading a column of armed men back toward the village. But beside him, riding with eerie grace, was another figure, a woman, Victoria. Solomon's blood ran cold. The last time he had seen Victoria Cortez, she had nearly cut him down with a blade faster than any human should be capable of wielding. He had suspected she wasn't normal, but now, watching the illusion in Isabella's magic, he realized the truth. She's like you, he murmured. Isabella's expression darkened. Yes, and she is far worse. Carlos clenched his jaw. How long do we have? 2 days, Isabella answered. Maybe less. A heavy silence fell over them. The rebels behind Isabella looked uneasy, but determined. Carlos exhaled sharply, his mind racing. Then we don't have a choice, he said finally. We make our move before they arrive. Solomon crossed his arms. That's suicide. We'll be outnumbered and outgunned. Isabella's violet eyes flickered. Not if we strike first, and not if we use their own tactics against them. Through the jungle, Victoria's march. The dense jungle swallowed the sound of hooves and grinding wheels as Victoria Cortez's convoy advanced through a narrow, secret path. The damp air carried the scent of rain and soil, mingling with the quiet murmurs of Esteban's men. He had told her about this route, a forgotten trail used by smugglers and mercenaries who once trafficked through the region. It would allow them to bypass the main roads and strike the village from an unexpected direction. Victoria sat tall in her saddle, her cold gaze fixed on the uneven trail ahead. She had never trusted Esteban, but she couldn't deny his cunning. His mind worked like a mercenary's, always scheming, always playing the long game. And yet, in all his calculations, he had never bested her. Her fingers twitched over the hilt of her blade, and a slow smirk played on her lips. Solomon Kane. Her last encounter with the man had been a dance of death, a battle of steel and instinct. He had fought unlike any soldier she had ever faced, reading her movements, countering her strikes with that infuriating precision. His blade had grazed her ribs, a wound that burned not just from steel, but from the sheer insult of it. No one had done that in years. She wondered if she would see him again. No, she knew she would. The jungle around her whispered with unseen life, but her thoughts were elsewhere. If Solomon Kane was in that village, this time, she would not let him escape. The village prepares. Back in the village, tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Jamie, once a girl in distress, now carried the shadow of a battle-hardened mercenary. She moved through the shadows, whispering to trusted villagers, passing weapons to those willing to fight. The people were afraid, but desperation outweighed their fear. Inside the modest home of Carlos's family, Maria, his wife, loaded bullets into a rusted revolver. Her hands were steady, her face unreadable. Around her, a handful of villagers gathered, farmers, blacksmiths, hunters, all preparing for a battle none of them had ever wanted. "You're sure about this?" one man asked nervously. Maria nodded. "We fight, or we die as slaves under Esteban. There's no other choice." Jamie exhaled, gripping her rifle. "Then let's make sure we hit them first." The gathering storm. As night fell over the village, Solomon stood watch from the church tower, scanning the dark horizon. They had one night left. Carlos approached, his face grim. "Everyone's in place. The rebels are waiting for Isabella's signal." Solomon nodded. "And Esteban?" Carlos's grip tightened on his weapon. "They'll be here by dawn." The weight of what was coming pressed upon them. Solomon had fought in wars before, had seen men break under pressure. But this wasn't just war. This was survival. He adjusted his rifle, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the hills. The storm was coming, and when it hit, only the strong would survive. The village had fallen silent in the hours before dawn, but it was a silence that trembled on the edge of violence. Smoke curled from scattered fires, the scent of gunpowder and sweat thick in the air. Bodies, both rebel and loyalist, littered the streets, the price of the brutal battle that had unfolded. Carlos wiped the blood from his brow, his grip tight around his rifle as he scanned the ruined village square. "We have it," he muttered, turning to Solomon, who stood nearby, his own weapon still warm from use. The fight had been quick but vicious. Esteban's men had fortified the village well, forcing the rebels into brutal street skirmishes that left no room for hesitation. But in the end, they had been driven out, retreating toward the jungle to regroup. It was a victory, but a fragile one. Solomon knew that much. He exhaled, shouldering his rifle and stepping over the fallen body of a loyalist soldier. "They'll be back." Carlos nodded grimly. And not alone. A shadow moved in the distance, and Solomon's gaze snapped toward the jungle beyond the village walls. There, just beyond the tree line, dark figures emerged, moving in disciplined formation. A elite unit. Victoria Langley had arrived. The counterattack. The village burned. Smoke curled into the night sky, carrying the scent of gunpowder, blood, and ash. The rebels had struck first, catching Esteban's forces off guard, seizing key positions. For a moment, it seemed like victory was within reach. But that illusion shattered the moment Victoria's elite soldiers stormed through the eastern barricade. Solomon Kane crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, watching the battle unfold in the main square. Assault rifles cracked in the dark. Torches flickered as shadows danced through the streets. The rebels were being pushed back fast. The organized brutality of Victoria's men was like a machine cutting through flesh. He clenched his jaw. They needed to turn this fight around. And fast. The ambush. Solomon moved like a ghost through the battle, slipping past enemy lines toward his real target, Victoria Langley. He found her standing in the ruins of the village head's old estate, her long coat billowing in the wind. Even in the chaos, she was composed, as if she had already foreseen the outcome of this battle. Solomon raised his rifle, aiming for her head. One shot. That's all it would take. His finger tightened on the trigger. Victoria turned. Their eyes met. She moved faster than he expected, ducking to the side as the bullet carved through the air where her head had been a second before. Solomon cursed, slinging his rifle onto his back. This was going to be up close and personal. Victoria drew her blade, a wickedly curved weapon that shimmered in the firelight. "I was hoping you'd come," she mused. "You always make things interesting." Solomon didn't waste words. He lunged, his knife flashing toward her throat. Victoria met his strike with ease, twisting her blade to deflect his attack. Sparks flew as steel kissed steel. She countered, fast, precise. Solomon barely dodged, feeling the wind of her blade graze his cheek. He stepped back, calculating. She was toying with him. Victoria smirked, tilting her head. "You're hesitating." "I don't hesitate," Solomon muttered, feinting left before slashing right. Victoria's blade met his, locking them in place. "Then why haven't you killed me yet?" He had no answer. A sudden explosion from the village square shattered their deadly dance. A moment of distraction, Solomon seized it. He disengaged, rolling backward and breaking into a sprint toward the battle. He didn't have time for this. He had men dying out there. Victoria didn't chase him. She simply watched as he disappeared into the smoke. The turning tide. The village square had become a slaughterhouse. Rebels fell, one after another, their makeshift weapons no match for Victoria's elite soldiers. The once burning torches were snuffed out, replaced by the flickering light of the fires spreading through the streets. Solomon arrived just as Carlos was pulling one of their men away from the fight. "We're losing ground," Carlos shouted over the gunfire. "I can see that," Solomon growled, reloading his rifle. Before Carlos could respond, a deafening boom echoed through the battlefield. ARPG. Victoria's forces had brought heavy weapons into play. The impact tore through a row of rebel barricades, sending debris flying. The rebels who weren't killed outright were thrown back by the sheer force of the explosion. Carlos wiped blood from his forehead. "We have to fall back." No, Solomon's voice was like iron. "We hold." Carlos hesitated, but the determination in Solomon's eyes left no room for argument. Solomon stepped forward, raising his voice. "If we run now, they'll cut us down like animals. We make our stand here. If you have a shot, take it. If you have a blade, use it. If you have your hands, fight with them." The rebels roared in defiance. The battle was far from over. Jamie's last stand. Across the village, Jamie stood guard in front of Carlos's home, gripping her rifle tightly. She had been assigned to protect his family, but something felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. Then she heard it, a soft click behind her. She spun just in time to see a figure step from the shadows. Esteban Morales. His smirk was sharp, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "Did you really think I'd let Carlos's family walk away from this unpunished?" Jamie's heart pounded. She raised her rifle. Esteban moved like a snake. In one swift motion, he knocked the barrel aside and drove his fist into her stomach. The air rushed from her lungs. She staggered back, gasping. Esteban chuckled. "You have fire, I'll give you that." Jamie gritted her teeth, gripping her rifle like a club. "I'm not afraid of you." Esteban tilted his head. Brave words for a girl who's about to die. He lunged. Jamie swung. The butt of her rifle struck his side, sending him stumbling back. For a brief moment, she thought she had the upper hand. Then pain exploded in her ribs as Esteban's boots slammed into her, knocking her onto the cobblestone ground. She gasped, struggling to breathe. Esteban stood over her, drawing his pistol. "I'll make this quick." Jamie coughed, blood trickling from her lips. He pressed the barrel to her forehead. "Any last words?" Jamie's fingers twitched, inching toward the hidden dagger at her belt. She met his gaze. "Go to hell." She struck. The dagger sliced across Esteban's cheek, drawing a thin line of crimson. He hissed, staggering back, but his grip on the pistol didn't waver. With a growl, he kicked her again, sending her sprawling onto her back. Jamie groaned, pain flooding her senses. Esteban wiped the blood from his face, shaking his head. That was a mistake. He cocked the pistol. Jamie closed her eyes, waiting for the shot. A single gunshot echoed through the night. The gunshot shattered the night. Esteban's smirk twisted into a snarl as he stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had torn through flesh. His pistol slipped from his grip, clattering onto the cobblestone street. Jamie gasped for breath, her ribs aching from his brutal kicks. She turned her head, vision swimming, and saw Maria standing there, revolver in hand. Carlos's wife had never held a gun in battle before. Her hands trembled around the rusted weapon, the barrel still smoking. But her dark eyes were steady, burning with quiet fury. "Stay away from my family," Maria spat. Esteban cursed, pressing a hand to his wound. He studied her for a moment, weighing his options. His men were still scattered in the fight, and he was bleeding badly. He couldn't win this right now. He took a step back, then another. Then, with a low growl of frustration, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Jamie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her entire body ached, but she forced herself upright. Blood still trickled from her lips, but she managed a shaky smile. "You saved my life," Jamie whispered. Maria lowered the revolver, her hands still shaking. "You would have done the same." Before she could say more, Carlos came running. His rifle was still clutched in his hands, but his eyes were locked on Maria. He pulled her into a tight embrace, pressing his forehead against hers. Maria exhaled, sinking into his arms. The battle still raged around them, but for this moment, they had survived. Jamie watched them, then turned as another figure approached. Solomon. Her breath caught for just a second. He was battered, streaked with soot and blood, his rifle still clutched in his hand. But when he saw her, his gaze softened. "You all right?" he asked. Jamie didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around him, holding on tight. Solomon stiffened for a moment, caught off guard, but then his hand came up, resting gently on her back. She buried her face against his chest for just a second, feeling the solid warmth of him. He had saved her. Again. "Thank you," she whispered. Solomon didn't reply, but he gave her shoulder a small squeeze before gently pulling away. They didn't have time to linger. The battle wasn't over yet. The rebels' breaking point. The village square had become a slaughterhouse. Solomon and Carlos fought desperately, leading their men against Victoria Langley's elite forces. The enemy soldiers moved with ruthless efficiency, cutting down rebels with disciplined bursts of fire. Barricades collapsed. Bodies littered the streets. The rebels were outgunned and outmatched. Carlos ducked behind cover, reloading his rifle with shaking hands. "We can't hold this position much longer." Solomon gritted his teeth, pressing his back against a crumbling stone wall. He knew Carlos was right. Across the battlefield, Victoria Langley stood atop a fallen barricade, watching the slaughter with cold precision. She wasn't celebrating. She was calculating. She raised a hand. A signal. From the far side of the village, a rocket-propelled grenade streaked through the night, slamming into a rebel stronghold. The explosion tore through their defenses, sending men flying. Carlos flinched as the shockwave rippled through the battlefield. "That's it. If we don't retreat now, we die here." Solomon exhaled sharply, his mind racing. He had one last gamble left. If it failed, they were all dead. Isabella's arrival. The battlefield shifts. A sudden horn blast echoed through the village. It wasn't victorious. A second later, the jungle erupted with gunfire. New soldiers emerged from the tree-line. Grenades arced through the air, and a fresh wave of rebels charged into the fray. Isabella had arrived. She led the charge personally, her twin pistols flashing in the firelight as she gunned down enemy soldiers with ruthless precision. Push forward. Isabella's voice rang out. Take back the square. The exhausted rebels rallied behind her, fighting with renewed strength. Victoria turned sharply, eyes narrowing as she assessed the battlefield. She had been seconds away from total victory, but Isabella's arrival had changed everything. For the first time since the battle began, she took a step back. The stalemate, both sides stepped back. The battle raged on, but neither side could gain the upper hand. Victoria's forces were strong, but Isabella had even the numbers. The fighting became brutal, desperate. Streets ran slick with blood, walls were pockmarked with bullet holes, and the air stank of smoke and death. But it was clear, neither side would win tonight. Victoria knew when to cut her losses. She wasn't going to waste her soldiers in a pointless struggle. She raised a hand. Another signal. Her forces began to withdraw, moving with careful discipline. Carlos exhaled in relief, but Solomon didn't let his guard down. Victoria wasn't running. She was regrouping. He watched as she disappeared into the smoke, knowing this fight was far from over. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, Esteban had vanished as well. He had escaped into the night, wounded but still dangerous. Solomon clenched his jaw. They would be back. The aftermath. As dawn began to creep over the village, the fires still smoldered. The rebels were battered and bruised, but they had survived. Carlos turned to Maria, still holding her close. He cupped her face, brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. Are you hurt? Maria shook her head. I'm fine. He exhaled, resting his forehead against hers for just a moment. Nearby, Jamie sat on a fallen crate, rubbing her sore ribs. She winced as Solomon approached. You sure you're all right? He asked. She gave him a tired smirk. I've been worse. Solomon huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Isabella stepped forward, surveying the battlefield. We won't get another chance like this, she murmured. We need to plan our next move, before Victoria does. Solomon nodded, his gaze hard. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun.